Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The first time it happened, I blamed the wind. My landline phone, a relic I kept mostly for my wife's peace of mind, for emergencies that never came, rang at 3:17 a.m. The sound was wrong somehow, thicker than usual, as if the bell had been wrapped in wet cloth. I stumbled through the darkness of the hallway, my bare feet registering the strange coldness of the hardwood floor despite it being the middle of August, and lifted the receiver to my ear. Breathing. Just breathing. Slow, deliberate, wet. I said hello 3 times. Each time the breathing continued, neither quickening nor slowing, perfectly rhythmic like a metronome made of meat and moisture. I hung up and stood there in the dark for a long moment, listening to the house settle around me, feeling the walls press closer than they should have been. My wife didn't wake. She never wakes anymore, not even when I speak directly into her ear. She sleeps like something waiting. The calls continued every night, always between 3 and 3:30 a.m. Always the same breathing, patient and obscene in its intimacy. I stopped answering after the 4th night, but the phone would ring for exactly 7 minutes before falling silent. I timed it, sitting rigid in bed while my wife's chest rose and fell beside me in that same slow rhythm. The same rhythm as the breathing on the phone. I noticed it on the 6th night. Her breathing synchronized with the ringing. Each ring corresponded to an exhale. When the phone stopped, she would shift slightly, and her breathing would change to something more natural, more random. I lay awake until dawn, watching her sleep, trying to convince myself I was imagining patterns where none existed. The smell started around the same time, a faint odor of copper and something sweeter underneath, like fruit beginning to turn. It was strongest near the phone, a beige plastic thing mounted on the wall in the hallway, its cords spiraling down to nowhere. I cleaned it with alcohol. I cleaned the wall behind it. The smell remained, seeping into the paint, into the wood, into the air I breathed. On the 10th night, I did something I'm not proud of. I pretended to sleep, watching my wife through barely open eyes as the phone began its nightly ritual. She lay still for the 1st ring, the 2nd, the 3rd. On the 4th ring, her lips moved. I couldn't hear what she said, if she said anything at all, but her lips definitely moved, forming shapes that might have been words or might have been something else entirely. Her eyes remained closed throughout. I told myself it was sleep talking. People talk in their sleep. This was normal. This was explicable. But I started sleeping on the couch after that. I called the phone company on day 11. The representative's voice was pleasant and empty, a customer service void that absorbed my complaints without reaction. I explained the calls, the breathing, the impossible timing. She put me on hold for 6 minutes. I counted, and returned to inform me that their records showed no incoming calls to my number for the past month. No calls at all. I asked her to check again. She did. Same result. The line, she explained in that hollow voice, had been essentially dormant. Did I want to discuss cancellation options? I canceled the service that afternoon. The representative assured me the line would be disconnected within 24 hours. I watched the phone on the wall as I hung up, half expecting it to ring right then, to prove something I wasn't ready to understand. The house felt different after that call, quieter, but not peacefully so. Quiet in the way a room becomes quiet when someone stops breathing. The shadows in the corners seemed denser, more deliberate in their placement. The copper smell intensified. That night, the phone rang at 3:17 a.m. I stood in the doorway of the bedroom, staring down the hall at the phone, its plastic body barely visible in the darkness. The service was canceled. The line was dead. The phone rang anyway, that same muffled wrong sound, like it was coming from underwater or from behind a wall of flesh. My wife's breathing synchronized immediately. I didn't answer. I stood there for 7 minutes, counting rings, counting breaths. feeling the temperature in the hallway drop degree by degree until I could see the faint cloud of my own exhalations. When the ringing stopped, I walked slowly to the phone and lifted the receiver. Dial tone. Perfect, ordinary dial tone, as if nothing had happened, as if nothing was wrong. I started keeping notes. Times, durations, temperatures, observations. My handwriting grew smaller and more cramped as the days passed, crowding the margins of the notebook I kept on the coffee table. I documented the patterns, the breathing's rhythm, roughly one breath every 2 seconds, the exact timing of the calls, always starting between 3:14 and 3:19 a.m., the correlation with my wife's sleep behavior. I documented other things too, the way the hallway seemed longer at night, requiring more steps to traverse than it did during the day. The photographs on the walls that appeared subtly altered, same images, same frames, but the angles slightly wrong, as if someone had photographed the same scenes from a position 2 feet to the left. The reflection in the bathroom mirror that seemed to blink a half second after I did. Small things. Explicable things, probably. The mind plays tricks when it doesn't sleep. My wife noticed my deterioration, or at least commented on it. She asked why I looked so tired, why I'd been sleeping on the couch, why I kept staring at her while she drifted off. I told her about the phone calls, some of them anyway, and she suggested I see someone. A professional. The word she didn't say was psychiatrist, but it hung in the air between us like the copper smell I could no longer escape. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was fracturing. But the phone still rang. I tried unplugging it. I tried removing it from the wall entirely, leaving behind a rectangular patch of slightly lighter paint and 2 holes where the mounting screws had been. I put the phone in the garage, wrapped in an old blanket, buried under boxes of holiday decorations we never used. That night, at 3:17 a.m., I heard it ringing from inside the house. I found the phone back on the wall. Same position, same angle, same spiral cord hanging to nowhere. I had not put it there. My wife had not put it there. She was asleep, her breathing already synchronized to the rings, her lips moving in those silent shapes I couldn't read. The phone was warm to the touch, as if something had been holding it. I stopped leaving the house. My job, something with numbers, with spreadsheets, with conference calls I no longer remembered how to care about, became an abstraction, a concept that existed somewhere outside these walls but no longer applied to me. My boss called several times. I let the calls go to voicemail, then deleted them without listening. His voice, I was certain, would sound like breathing. The world beyond the windows grew suspicious. I noticed people stopping on the sidewalk to look at the house, just briefly, just glances, but too many of them, too frequently. The mail carrier lingered too long at the box. The neighbor across the street started watering his lawn at odd hours, his face turned toward my windows, his expression unreadable at that distance. My wife came and went as she always had, her routine undisturbed by my dissolution. She kissed me goodbye in the mornings, her lips cool against my forehead, and returned in the evenings with groceries, with stories from her day, with concern that progressively hardened into something else. Not anger, exactly, but a kind of clinical distance, as if she were observing a specimen rather than living with a husband. I tried to tell her what was happening, really tell her. But every time I opened my mouth, the words caught somewhere in my throat, thick and wrong, like the sound of the phone ringing. I could only watch her watching me, her eyes reflecting nothing I recognized. The copper smell was everywhere now, inescapable, layered under every other scent until I couldn't remember what clean air tasted like. 2 weeks after canceling the service, I decided to answer. The phone rang at 3:17 a.m., as it always did. I was already standing in the hallway, waiting, my notebook clutched in one hand, my pen in the other, ready to document whatever came next. The temperature was 58 degrees. I'd installed a thermometer specifically for these observations, and dropping. My wife's breathing from the bedroom was perfectly synchronized. Exhale on ring 1, inhale on ring 2. The rhythm of something pretending to be human. I lifted the receiver, breathing, the same breathing, wet and deliberate and patient. I said nothing. I pressed the phone against my ear until the plastic bit into my skin, until I could hear under the breathing, beneath it somehow, a faint crackling like static, like fire, like the sound of something very large shifting in its sleep. And then the breathing changed. It became words. My voice, my exact voice, down to the slight rasp I'd developed from sleeplessness, came through the speaker with terrible clarity. Don't answer. The line clicked dead. I've read that phrase 1,000 times since then, written it in my notebook, spoken it aloud in the empty hallway while my wife sleeps her synchronized sleep. Don't answer. A warning or a threat, an instruction or a prophecy. My own voice, reaching back from somewhere, somewhen, to deliver a message I received too late. But too late for what? The phone still rings. Every night, 3:17 a.m., that muffled underwater bell. I don't answer anymore, but I listen. I stand in the hallway and I listen to the 7 minutes of ringing, and sometimes, more often now, I hear my own voice under the sound, speaking words I can't quite make out, saying things I haven't said yet. My wife's lips move in her sleep. I've started to recognize the shapes. They match the words I'm speaking in the hallway, the words I don't know I'm saying until I see her mouth form them first. The photographs on the walls continue to shift. The angles grow more extreme with each passing day, as if the camera is moving backward, pulling away from the scenes, revealing more of what was always just outside the frame. In one of them, our wedding picture, I can now see a shape in the background that wasn't there before. A figure standing just behind where the photographer would have been. It looks like me. The copper smell has localized now, concentrated around my wife's side of the bed, around the pillow where her head rests during those synchronized hours. I found myself standing over her last night, watching her breathe, watching her lips move, trying to read the words she was forming. She opened her eyes. For one terrible moment, I saw something looking back at me that was not my wife, something ancient and patient, something that breathed in rhythms I was only beginning to understand. Then she blinked, and she was herself again, asking me what was wrong, why I was standing there, why I looked so afraid. I couldn't answer. The phone on the wall is warm again. It's always warm now, even when it's not ringing. Even during the daylight hours when the house pretends to be normal, I press my hand against it sometimes, feeling that unnatural heat, and I swear I can feel a pulse beneath the plastic, slow and deliberate and perfectly synchronized with the breathing I can no longer stop hearing, even when the line is silent. I've started sleeping in the hallway. It feels safer there, closer to the phone, closer to the voice that might be warning me or might be calling me towards something I don't yet understand. My wife watches me from the bedroom doorway sometimes, her expression unreadable, her breathing steady. The phone will ring again tonight. It always does. And I know, with a certainty that has replaced all my other certainties, all my memories of what normal once felt like, that eventually I will answer again. I will lift the receiver and press it against my ear, and my own voice will tell me something new, something I don't want to know. The photographs are still shifting. The figure in the background is closer now. I can almost see its face. It looks like it's been waiting a very long time. And somewhere, in a version of this house I'm only beginning to glimpse, a phone is ringing, and I'm the one breathing into it. Story 2. Oh, the painting hung crooked when I returned from work on Thursday, though I had straightened it that very morning. I remember this with certainty because my wife had commented on my obsessive adjustments, the way I kept returning to that wall in our living room, tilting the frame a degree left, a degree right, never quite satisfied. But now the bottom right corner dipped toward the floor like a head bowing in prayer, and the late afternoon light caught the varnish at an angle that made the painted sky seem to pulse with a sickly amber glow. I had purchased it 3 weeks earlier from an antique shop downtown, one of those places that smells of dust and furniture polish, and something else underneath, something organic, like the memory of flowers left too long in stagnant water. The shop owner, a thin woman with reading glasses perpetually perched on her forehead, had seemed almost relieved when I expressed interest in the piece. She wrapped it quickly, her fingers trembling slightly, and quoted me a price so low I nearly asked if she'd made a mistake. I didn't ask. Some part of me, the practical part that hunts for bargains and despises overpaying, silenced the question before it could form. The painting depicted a pastoral scene, a wheat field stretching toward distant hills, a farmhouse with smoke curling from its chimney, and a dirt path winding from the foreground into the golden distance. The brushwork was unremarkable, competent but uninspired, the kind of art that fills the walls of budget hotels and retirement homes. What drew my attention was the figure, a person standing in the far background, little more than a dark smudge against the amber grain. I couldn't determine their gender or age. They were simply there, watching the farmhouse or perhaps looking beyond it, towards something the artist had chosen not to paint. When I first noticed the figure had moved, I convinced myself I'd simply never looked closely enough. Memory is unreliable. We fill in gaps with assumptions, construct narratives from fragments. The figure had always been standing beside that particular cluster of wheat stalks, hadn't they? Always positioned at that exact distance from the farmhouse door. But I started taking photographs. My phone's gallery became a sequence of nearly identical images, the painting captured under different lighting conditions, at different times of day. When I compared them late at night, my wife already asleep upstairs, I saw what I didn't want to see. In the earliest photograph, the figure stood near the hills, barely distinguishable from the painted shadows. 3 days later, they had moved past the farmhouse. By the end of the second week, they occupied the middle ground of the composition, and I could make out details that hadn't existed before. The suggestion of arms held stiffly at their sides, a head tilted at an angle that seemed almost quizzical, almost amused. The temperature in our living room began to drop. Not dramatically, not in ways I could point to and declare unnatural. The thermostat remained steady. The heating system hummed along as it always had, but the corner where the painting hung felt cold in a way that crept into my joints, that made my fingers ache when I stood before the canvas for too long. My wife complained about drafts and suggested we check the window seals. I agreed, and we found nothing wrong, and the cold persisted. I stopped sleeping well. Not insomnia exactly. I could fall asleep easily enough, exhausted by a day spent distracted at work, my mind returning again and again to that painted figure, to their slow, inexorable approach. But I woke at intervals throughout the night, always at moments when the house felt too quiet, when the silence seemed to press against my eardrums like the anticipation of a sound that never came. I would lie in the darkness beside my wife's sleeping form and feel watched, observed, studied with a patience I couldn't comprehend. My colleague asked if I was feeling unwell. My wife wondered if the stress from work had finally caught up with me. I smiled and nodded and made excuses, and all the while I thought about the painting, about the figure who now stood in the foreground, close enough that I could see the texture the artist had given their clothing, dark, simple, without ornament. Close enough that I noticed their face remained blank, featureless, a smooth oval of flesh-toned paint where eyes and mouth should have been. I began researching the painting's history. The antique shop owner remembered nothing useful. She'd acquired it as part of an estate sale, hadn't bothered to trace its provenance. The signature in the corner was illegible, a scrawl of brownish pigment that could have been initials, or could have been nothing at all. I spent hours online searching for similar works, for any record of the artist, for anything that might explain what I was experiencing. I found nothing. The painting seemed to exist outside of history, untethered from the world of catalogs and authentication and sensible explanations. My wife wanted to know why I kept staring at that painting. I told her I found it restful, which was perhaps the most absurd lie I'd ever spoken. She accepted it because she wanted to, because the alternative, that her husband had become fixated on a cheap piece of art to the point of obsession, was too strange to confront directly. We had been married for 11 years. We had learned the art of strategic ignorance, of letting certain questions remain unasked. The smell came next. Faint at first, barely distinguishable from the normal scents of our home, cleaning products, the residue of meals, the particular musk of lived-in spaces. But it grew stronger as the days passed, a sweetness that wasn't quite pleasant, that reminded me of overripe fruit and something else, something I couldn't identify but that made my stomach clench with an instinctive revulsion. The smell was strongest near the painting, and when I pressed my nose close to the canvas, fighting the urge to recoil, I could almost believe the odor emanated from the painted wheat field itself, from that frozen landscape that had somehow become more real than it should be. I started hearing things. Small sounds, easily explained away. The settling of the house, the scratch of branches against windows, the thousand tiny noises any home makes when you listen too closely. But among them, woven through them like a discordant thread, came sounds that fit no explanation. A faint exhalation, as if someone had sighed just behind my shoulder. The soft scrape of fabric against fabric, clothing moving with a body's motion. Footsteps that stopped the moment I turned my head, that resumed the instant I looked away. The figure reached the edge of the frame on Tuesday. They stood at the painting's rightmost boundary, their blank face turned toward me, toward the room, toward everything that existed beyond the canvas. Their posture had changed. They leaned forward slightly as if pressing against an invisible barrier, as if testing the membrane between their world and mine. I sat in the armchair across the room and watched them for hours, waiting for the movement I knew I would never see, the shift that would only become apparent in tomorrow's photograph. My wife found me there at 2 a.m, awake, unblinking, my eyes dry and aching. She wanted to call a doctor. She wanted to remove the painting. She wanted to do something, anything, to break the spell that had settled over our home like a fog. I told her I was fine. I told her I just needed rest. I told her the painting was valuable and we shouldn't damage it by moving it carelessly. These were not lies exactly, more like words that served a purpose, sounds that filled the space where truth should have been. Wednesday morning, I took my final photograph. The figure stood at the very edge, their featureless face filling the bottom corner of the frame. If there had been eyes to meet, I would have been staring directly into them. If there had been a mouth, it would have been close enough to whisper. I went to work. I sat through meetings. I responded to emails with the mechanical precision of someone operating their body from a great distance. And all day I felt the wrongness gathering in my chest, the certainty that something was about to change in a way that couldn't be undone. I arrived home at 6:47 in the evening. The house was quiet. My wife's car was in the driveway, but she didn't respond when I called out to her. The living room was cold, so cold I could see my breath misting before me, though the thermostat showed 72 degrees. And the painting was empty. The wheat field stretched unbroken toward the hills. The farmhouse stood alone, smoke still curling from its chimney. The dirt path wound into the golden distance without interruption, without obstacle, without the dark figure that had occupied that landscape for as long as I had known it. The composition was complete, technically accomplished, utterly mundane, and utterly, horribly vacant. I stood before the canvas for a long time, minutes, perhaps longer. The cold pressed against my skin like fingers, like attention, like the weight of observation from something patient and old, and finally free. The smell had grown stronger, that sweetness, that wrongness, that suggestion of things decaying in darkness. And beneath the silence, beneath the ordinary sounds of an empty house on a quiet street, I heard breathing that was not my own. I have not turned around. I will not turn around. I know with a certainty that transcends logic or sanity, that if I look behind me, I will see what left the painting, what stepped out of that amber world into mine. I will see the face that was never painted, the features that exist only in the space between brushstrokes and canvas, in the gap between what the artist imagined and what took up residence in their creation. My wife is somewhere in this house. The silence where her presence should be terrifies me more than the breathing behind me, more than the cold, more than the empty painting that seems to pulse with satisfaction on the wall. I call her name again, and my voice sounds wrong, thin, muffled, as if the air itself has thickened. as if the space around me has become something other than space. The breathing grows closer. I feel it now against the back of my neck, warm where everything else is cold, rhythmic with a patience that has outlasted the artist, the antique shop owner, every previous owner whose names I'll never know. I wonder if they too stood like this, frozen, unable to turn, unable to flee, waiting for something they couldn't name to finish crossing the distance between worlds. I should move. I should run. I should scream for my wife, break through whatever paralysis has seized my limbs and tear myself from this room that no longer feels like mine. But there's a part of me, a part I don't want to acknowledge, a part that whispers in a voice like paint cracking on ancient canvas, that wants to see. That needs to know what the artist glimpsed in some forgotten moment of inspiration or madness. That understands, finally, that the painting was never a window. It was a door. And it was never meant to stay closed. The breathing pauses. I feel something rise behind me, something that casts no shadow, because shadow requires light and substance, and the physics of a world that still makes sense. My reflection in the dark window glass shows only me, alone, facing a painting of a pastoral scene that has never contained anything unusual at all. But I am not alone. I have never been alone since I brought that canvas into my home, and when I finally turn, because I will turn, because the waiting has become unbearable, because some part of me has already surrendered to whatever waits in the space behind my shoulder, I know I will see exactly what I deserve to see. After all, I chose the painting. I hung it on my wall. I watched the figure approach and did nothing, said nothing, believed nothing, until belief became irrelevant. The breathing resumes, and slowly, so slowly, I begin to turn. Story 3. The glasses were warm when I pulled them from the microwave, not residual heat from forgotten coffee or reheated leftovers. Warm like something living had been holding them. I stood in my kitchen at 3:47 a.m., barefoot on the cold tile, and I could feel the heat seeping through the frames into my fingertips. The digital clock on the stove cast a green pallor across everything, and somewhere in the walls, pipes groaned as if the house itself were sighing. I lifted the lenses toward the light. That's when I saw them. 2 fingerprints, perfectly formed, etched into the glass from the inside out. Not smudges, etchings. As if someone had pressed their fingers against the inner surface of the lenses with enough force to leave permanent impressions in the material itself. I traced my own finger over them, felt the slight texture, the unmistakable ridges of a whirl pattern that wasn't mine. I've worn glasses since I was 12. I know my own fingerprints like I know the shape of my own face in the mirror. These belonged to someone else. It started 3 weeks ago. Small things at first. The kind of small things you dismiss because your brain is too tired to process the alternative. I'd place my glasses on the nightstand before bed, the way I've done every night for 23 years of marriage, and wake to find them missing. The first time, they turned up in the bathroom, balanced on the edge of the sink. I assumed I'd been sleepwalking. Stress, maybe. Work had been difficult. My supervisor had been making comments about my performance, the kind delivered with a smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Sleep disruption seemed like a reasonable explanation. The second time, I found them in the refrigerator, tucked between a carton of eggs and a jar of pickles. The lenses had fogged from the cold, and when I put them on, the world swam in milky distortion for almost a full minute before clearing. My wife was already at work by then. I didn't mention it when she came home. What would I have said? That I'd refrigerated my own glasses in my sleep? She already thought I was working too hard. She'd started sleeping with her back to me, the curve of her spine a wall I didn't know how to scale. The third night, I tried staying awake. I made coffee at midnight and sat in the armchair facing the bedroom door, glasses perched on my nose, watching. I remember checking my phone at 2:15 a.m. The next thing I remember is my wife shaking my shoulder, morning light harsh against my eyes, asking why I was sleeping in the living room with an empty mug in my lap. My glasses were gone. We found them an hour later, inside the hollow body of the decorative duck on our mantel. Its ceramic eyes seemed to watch me as I reached inside its open back and retrieved them. The frames felt greasy, coated in something that smelled faintly of copper. I cleaned them with lens solution and tried not to think about it. The house began to feel different after that. I've lived here for 8 years. I know every creak in the floorboards, every draft that slips through the gaps in the window frames, the specific way the refrigerator hums at night. But now there were new sounds. A soft tapping that seemed to come from inside the walls, always just behind wherever I was standing. A wet, rhythmic sound from the basement that stopped the moment I opened the door to investigate. The smell of something burning that would appear suddenly and vanish before I could locate its source. My wife noticed nothing, or claimed to notice nothing. I'd ask if she heard the tapping, and she'd look at me with an expression I couldn't read, concern maybe, or something colder, and shake her head. She started coming home later from work, started taking phone calls in the other room with the door closed. When I asked who she was talking to, she said it was her sister. But her sister lives in another state and they haven't spoken in months. I checked her phone once, when she was in the shower. The call log showed numbers I didn't recognize, timestamps that didn't match when I'd seen her talking. I'm not a paranoid person. I need you to understand that. I've never been the kind of man who sees conspiracies, who suspects motives, who lies awake imagining threats. But the glasses kept moving, and the fingerprints kept appearing. A week ago, I set up a camera. An old phone, propped on the dresser, angled toward the nightstand. I charged it fully, opened the video app, pressed record, and went to sleep with the red light blinking in my peripheral vision like a tiny watching eye. In the morning, the phone was dead. Not just out of battery, dead. The screen wouldn't turn on. When I took it to a repair shop, the technician looked at me strangely and said the internal components had been corroded, as if exposed to moisture. But the phone had been dry when I left it. The bedroom had been dry. There was no explanation, and the technician's eyes kept sliding away from mine as if he were afraid to look at me directly. I bought a new camera, a proper one, with night vision and motion detection. I hid it better this time, tucked behind a stack of books on the shelf, its lens barely visible. That night, I took a sleeping pill, the first one I'd taken in years, because I needed to know that I wasn't doing this to myself. I needed proof that I was staying in bed. The footage, when I reviewed it the next morning, showed me sleeping motionless for 6 hours. At 3:22 a.m., the image distorted. Static at first, just a flicker, and then something else, a shape. It was only visible for 11 frames, less than half a second of footage. But I played those frames over and over until my eyes burned. There was something standing next to my bed, something tall and thin, bending over me, its arms, if they were arms, extended toward my face. The image was too corrupted to make out details, but I could see the suggestion of fingers. Long. Too long. And in the frame where the shape was clearest, I could see that it was holding something. My glasses. The next frame showed empty room. The frame after that, my glasses were no longer on the nightstand. I found them that morning in the attic. I hadn't been in the attic in months. The ladder is heavy, and my back has been bothering me. But there they were, sitting in the center of the floor, surrounded by a perfect circle of dust as if something had cleared the space deliberately. The lenses were facing up, and when I picked them up, I noticed that the prescription had changed. Everything I looked at through them was slightly wrong. Edges that didn't quite align, distances that seemed to shift when I moved my head. I wore them anyway. What else could I do? My wife found the footage. I don't know how. I thought I'd deleted it, but she found it somehow. And when I came home from work, she was sitting at the kitchen table with her coat still on, her keys still in her hand, as if she'd been frozen in the act of arriving. She asked me what I was doing. She asked me why I was filming myself sleeping. She asked me, her voice very quiet, if I was feeling all right. I tried to explain. I showed her the frames, the shape, the impossible figure bending over me in the dark. She looked at the screen for a long time, and then she looked at me, and her expression was one I'd never seen before. Not fear, not concern. Something closer to pity, maybe, or the careful blankness of someone who has made a decision they don't want to share. She stayed at her sister's that night. She said she needed space. She said I needed to talk to someone, a professional, someone who could help me understand what was happening. The house felt enormous without her. Every room too large, every shadow too deep. I sat in the living room with all the lights on and watched the corners of my vision for movement. At 3:33 a.m., I heard the microwave door open and close. The fingerprints are getting clearer. Every night, no matter where I find the glasses, the etchings on the lenses are more defined. I can see the individual ridges now, the loops and whirls of a print pattern that matches nothing in any database I can access. I've started photographing them, documenting them, building a file of evidence that I keep in a locked drawer in my desk. The file is getting thick. The prints are always the same two fingers, the same positions on the lenses, as if whoever or whatever is touching them has a ritual, a routine, a purpose I can't comprehend. I stopped wearing the glasses 3 days ago. My vision is blurry without them, the world reduced to soft shapes and uncertain edges. But I couldn't stand the feeling anymore. Every time I put them on, I felt something watching me through the lenses. Not from outside, from within the glass itself. A presence that seemed to press against my eyes, trying to see what I was seeing, trying to look through me at the world I inhabited. I bought new glasses, drove to a town 40 miles away, paid cash, gave a fake name. I wore them home and felt for the first time in weeks like I could breathe. The new lenses were clean, clear, untouched by foreign hands. That night I placed them on the nightstand and woke to find them inside my pillowcase, pressed against my cheek, warm and humid from my breath. The fingerprints were already there, deeper than they'd ever been on the old pair, etched so deeply that I could see hairline fractures spreading through the glass like frozen lightning. My wife came back this morning. She said she wanted to talk. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, and I noticed things I hadn't noticed before. The way her fingers moved when she spoke, long and thin and precise. The way her eyes didn't quite track with her head when she turned to look at me. The smell that clung to her, faint but unmistakable, like copper and burning. She asked if I'd been sleeping better. I said yes. She asked if I'd thrown away the cameras. I said yes. She smiled, and for just a moment, less than a heartbeat, I saw something shift beneath her face. Something that pressed against the inside of her skin like fingers pressing against glass from within. She reached across the table and took my hand. Her touch was warm. Too warm. And somewhere in the house I heard the soft click of the microwave door opening. I'm writing this now because I need someone to know. I need a record, something outside my own head. Something that proves I'm not imagining this. The glasses are sitting on the table in front of me, and I haven't looked at them, but I can feel them watching. I can feel the fingerprints pressing outward from the inside of the lenses, reaching toward me, waiting for me to put them on so they can finally see clearly. My wife is humming in the other room. I don't recognize the melody. I keep thinking about those fingerprints, burned into the glass from the inside out, and I keep asking myself a question I'm afraid to answer. If something is trying to look through my glasses at the world, what happens when it finally succeeds? What happens when it stops looking and starts seeing? The microwave just beeped. My wife is calling me to come look at something. She says she found my glasses in a new place, a place she thinks I'll find funny. Her voice doesn't sound quite like her voice anymore. I think I'm going to go see what she found. Story 4. The first strand appeared on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays have always been the quietest days of my week. No meetings, no calls, nothing but the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the building settling into itself. I woke that morning to gray light filtering through the blinds and found it there, coiled on my pillow like a sleeping question mark. Long, black, impossibly fine. My hair is brown, short, has been since college. I picked it up between my thumb and forefinger, held it against the pale morning light. It caught the glow and shimmered with an almost blue undertone. the kind of sheen you see in shampoo commercials, in the hair of women who exist only in photographs. I dropped it into the wastebasket beside my nightstand and thought nothing more of it. That was 3 weeks ago. My apartment sits on the 14th floor of a building that calls itself luxury, but smells faintly of old carpet and institutional cleaning products. I moved here 8 months ago, after the divorce finalized. The unit came furnished: beige couch, oak coffee table, a bed that's too soft but that I've grown used to. I kept the blinds from my old place, the ones with the broken slat that lets in a thin blade of light every morning. I don't know why I kept them. Maybe because they were the only thing that was entirely mine. I live alone. I have always lived alone here. No visitors, no overnight guests, no friends who might have left something behind. My neighbors are phantoms. I hear them sometimes, footsteps above, muffled television through the walls, but I've never seen their faces. The building has a doorman, an older man with heavy eyelids who nods at me when I pass but never speaks. There is no way anyone could enter my apartment without my knowledge. And yet, by the end of the first week, I was finding 3 or 4 strands each morning. They appeared in different places: on the pillow, tangled in the sheets, once draped across my forearm as if placed there deliberately. I began to inspect my bedroom before sleep, running my hands over the fabric, checking the corners, the closet, the space beneath the bed where dust gathered in gray drifts. Nothing. No explanation. No source. I called the building manager and asked if there had been any maintenance work, any entry into my unit. She checked the logs and told me no one had accessed my apartment in months. I asked about the previous tenant. She paused. I could hear her keyboard clicking, and said the unit had been vacant for over a year before I moved in. When I pressed for details, she grew vague. Something about renovations. Something about taking time to get the unit ready. I didn't ask what it needed to be ready for. The strands multiplied. By the second week, I was waking to clusters of them. 5, 10, 15 hairs arranged on my pillow in loose spirals. They were always the same. Long, black, impossibly fine. I started keeping them in a jar on my dresser, a mason jar that had once held pasta sauce. I don't know why I kept them. Proof, maybe. Evidence that I wasn't imagining this, that something was happening in the quiet hours between sleep and waking. The jar filled slowly. I would hold it up to the light and watch the strands shift inside, sliding over each other like something alive. I stopped sleeping well. I would lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, listening for any sound that didn't belong. The apartment was silent except for the familiar creaks, the hum of pipes, the distant murmur of the city below. But the silence felt different now, heavier, more deliberate, as if something was waiting in it. I began to dream. In the dreams, I would wake in my bed and find the room changed. The walls closer, the ceiling lower, the air thick with a smell I couldn't identify, something floral and decaying at once, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. I would try to move but couldn't, my body pinned by an invisible weight. And in the corner of the room, just beyond the edge of my vision, something would be watching. I could never see it directly, only the sense of it, a presence, patient and still, waiting for me to turn my head. I never turned my head. I would wake gasping, drenched in sweat, and find more hair on my pillow, always more. I started researching, spent hours online reading about parasomnia, about sleepwalking, about the strange things the unconscious mind can do. I read about people who cooked entire meals while asleep, who carried on conversations they couldn't remember, who left their homes and walked for miles through dark streets. I read about false awakenings, dreams nested inside dreams, the way the brain can construct elaborate fictions and present them as memory. I wanted to believe I was doing this to myself, that somewhere in the depths of sleep, I was finding this hair, pulling it from a drain, a vent, some hidden reservoir I couldn't locate while awake, and placing it on my pillow. The alternative was worse. The alternative meant something else was in my apartment, something I couldn't see. I installed a camera, a small device, motion activated, positioned on my dresser with a clear view of the bed. I checked the footage every morning, scrubbing through hours of darkness, watching myself sleep. The quality was poor, grainy, washed out in the infrared light, but I could see myself clearly enough. I slept on my back, mostly still, occasionally turning to face the wall. Nothing unusual, nothing that explained the hair. But on the fifth night of recording, I noticed something. At 3:17 a.m., the camera glitched, just for a moment. A flutter of static, a brief distortion that scrambled the image into meaningless noise. It lasted less than a second. When the picture returned, I was still in bed, still sleeping. Nothing changed. Except the blanket had moved. Slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if someone had pulled it back and then replaced it. I watched that moment over and over. I slowed it down, frame by frame, but the glitch obscured everything. There was only the before and the after, and the thin gap of static in between. That night, I didn't sleep at all. The patterns started appearing during the third week. I woke one morning and found the strands arranged in a circle on my pillow. Perfect. Deliberate. The next day, a spiral. The day after, something that looked like crossed lines. An X, maybe, or something older. A symbol I didn't recognize. I told myself it was chance. Random arrangements that my tired mind was interpreting as meaningful. I was sleep-deprived, anxious, prone to seeing patterns where none existed. This is what humans do. We find faces in clouds, messages in static, meaning in chaos. It's a survival mechanism gone haywire, nothing more. But then came the letters. 3 days ago, I woke to find the hair arranged in a shape I couldn't deny. It was crude, imperfect, but unmistakable. A letter. A single letter, formed from dozens of strands laid end to end with terrible patience. M. I stared at it for a long time. My hands were shaking. My mouth had gone dry, my tongue thick and foreign against my teeth. I photographed it with my phone, then swept the strands into the jar with the others. The jar was nearly full now. The next morning, there was another letter. A. And beside it, the beginning of a third. A curved shape, not yet complete. Someone was spelling something. Someone was leaving me a message. And I was beginning to understand what it said. I have not slept in 41 hours. The letters continued. Each morning brought new strands, new configurations, new pieces of the message being assembled on my pillow. I've written them down in order, trying to make sense of the sequence, trying to find some meaning that doesn't terrify me. M-A-R-I. 4 letters, the beginning of a name. There was a moment, I'm not proud of this, when I considered that I might be doing this myself, that some fractured part of my mind was waking in the night and arranging the hair, leaving messages for my conscious self to find. A cry for help from my own subconscious, perhaps. A warning I couldn't articulate while awake. I went to my bathroom mirror and pulled at my hair. Brown, short, firmly rooted. I checked every drain in the apartment, every vent, every crack and crevice where hair might collect. Nothing, no source, no explanation. The name isn't familiar. I've never known anyone named Mari, or Maria, or Mariana, or whatever the complete word might be. I searched my memory for any connection, any forgotten encounter, any relationship that might have left this residue in my life. Nothing. The name belongs to no one I know. And yet, there's a feeling that has been growing in me these past weeks, a sense of recognition that I can't explain. When I close my eyes, I sometimes see a face. Just the suggestion of one, features blurred and indistinct, like a photograph left in water. Dark hair, dark eyes, a smile that isn't quite right. I don't know if I'm remembering something or imagining it. The line between the two has become very thin. Last night, I finally slept. I didn't mean to. Exhaustion pulled me under like a riptide, dragging me into dreams I couldn't escape. The apartment was different again, smaller, darker, the walls pressing in. The smell was stronger now, that sweet rot of dying flowers, and I could hear something in the corner of the room, breathing, slow and patient. I tried to keep my eyes forward. I tried not to look. But in dreams, you don't always control what you do. I turned. She was there, standing in the corner where the shadows gathered thickest, long black hair falling past her shoulders, past her waist, pooling on the floor like spilled ink. I couldn't see her face. It was turned away, or maybe there was no face to see, but I knew she was looking at me. I could feel her attention like a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, squeezing the air from my lungs. She raised one hand, slowly, deliberately, and pointed at my pillow. I woke screaming. The sound tore from my throat before I was fully conscious, raw and animal, echoing off the walls of my empty apartment. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples, in my fingertips, in the space behind my eyes. The room was empty. The corners were empty. I was alone. But on my pillow, the message was complete. M-A-R-I-A-N-A. A full name, spelled out in long black strands of hair. I sat there for a long time, watching the early light creep across the floor. The strands shimmered on the white fabric, that familiar blue-black sheen, impossibly fine. They looked almost like they were moving, shifting, rearranging. But that was just the light. Just my tired eyes. Just my imagination. I reached for my phone. I don't know what I intended to do. Search the name maybe, or call someone, anyone, who might tell me I wasn't losing my mind. But before I could unlock it, I saw the notification on the screen. A reminder. Calendar alert. Anniversary, it said. The date was today. Anniversary of what? I don't remember setting any reminder. I don't remember any significant date attached to today. I tapped the notification, but there was no additional information. Just the word, floating alone on my screen. Anniversary. I looked back at the pillow, at the name spelled out in strands of black hair. Mariana. Something flickered at the edge of my vision. A shadow that moved wrong, a darkness that didn't match the light. I turned to look, my breath caught in my throat, and the apartment was empty. Just me, just the silence, just the faint smell of flowers rotting in still water. I don't know what's real anymore. I don't know if I ever knew. Maybe I'm dreaming right now. Maybe I've been dreaming for weeks, trapped in some endless loop of false awakenings and forgotten memories. But the hair is real. The jar is real. The name is real. And somewhere, in the space between sleeping and waking, she is waiting. I can feel her. I've always felt her. I just didn't remember. Story 5. The clock reads 3:07 when I wake to the sound of laughter. Not the distant echo of a television left on, not the residual fragments of a dream dissolving into consciousness. This is real, high-pitched, crystalline, unmistakably the laughter of small voices carried through the thin glass of my bedroom window. I lie perfectly still beneath the sheets, my breath caught somewhere between my chest and throat, listening. The sound rises and falls in waves, punctuated by the rhythmic chanting that accompanies circle games, the kind I haven't heard since my own childhood in this very house. There are no children in this neighborhood. I know this with absolute certainty because I have lived here alone for 11 years, watching the demographic shift from young families to retirees to empty houses with for sale signs that weather and fade, and eventually come down, replaced by nothing. The couple 3 doors down moved to assisted living last spring. The house directly behind mine has been vacant for 2 years, its windows dark, its lawn maintained by a service that comes once a month, whether anyone lives there or not. Yet the laughter continues, and beneath it, I can make out the words now. Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies. My wife used to tell me I had an overactive imagination. She said it affectionately at first, during those early years when my tendency to see shapes and shadows and hear whispers and white noise seemed charming, artistic even. Later, she said it differently. Later, she stopped saying it at all and simply looked at me with an expression I couldn't name but understood perfectly, the look of someone who has begun to suspect they share their life with a stranger. She left 8 months ago. The divorce papers arrived 6 weeks later. I signed them at the kitchen table at 2 a.m. because that's when I do most things now, in those hollow hours when the world feels thin and permeable, when the boundary between what is and what might be grows soft as rotting fruit. I push myself upright in bed. The sheets are damp with sweat despite the chill in the room. I keep the thermostat low, always have, because I cannot sleep in warmth, because warmth feels like suffocation, like being buried alive in the comfortable expectations of normalcy. The laughter swells, then recedes, then swells again. Ashes, ashes, we all fall down. The window is a rectangle of blue-black darkness across the room. Beyond it lies the backyard I have avoided for weeks now, the grass grown wild, the old swing set my father built decades ago still standing in the far corner, its chains rusted, its wooden seat split down the middle. I have not walked out there since the night I found the handprints. They appeared on the sliding glass door that leads from the kitchen to the back patio, small hands pressed flat against the exterior surface, leaving prints in the accumulated grime and pollen. 5 sets of them, at varying heights, as though multiple figures of different sizes had stood there, palms against the glass, looking in. I told myself it was condensation, a trick of temperature differential and neglect. I told myself this even as I noticed that the prints were on the outside, that no living person had legitimate reason to be in my backyard, that the smallest set of prints was at a height suggesting someone no more than 3 feet tall. I cleaned the glass the next morning. The prints returned that night. Now I stand at my bedroom window, the floorboards cold beneath my bare feet, and I look down into the yard. The moon is 3/4 full, casting enough light to see the outline of the swing set, the tangled shadows of the untended bushes along the fence, and them. They are there, in my backyard, dancing. I count 5 figures moving in a circle, their movements eerily synchronized, their hands clasped together as they orbit some invisible center point. They are small, the size one would expect of young ones between the ages of 5 and 7, and they are dressed in clothing that seems wrong somehow, outdated in ways I can't immediately articulate. The fabric looks heavy, formal, the cuts and styles reminiscent of photographs I've seen in old family albums, images from decades before I was born. Ring around the rosy. Their voices reach me clearly now, despite the closed window, despite the distance, as though the sound originates not from their mouths, but from somewhere inside my own skull, resonating through bone and tissue and the soft gray matter that increasingly feels like enemy territory. I should call someone. The thought arrives distantly, as though from a great remove, and I recognize it as the thought of a sane person, a rational person, the kind of person I used to pretend to be. I should pick up the phone and dial the police and report trespassers in my yard. I should turn on the floodlights and watch them scatter like startled animals. I should do any of the things a normal homeowner would do when confronted with uninvited visitors in the small hours of the morning. Instead, I press my palm flat against the window glass. The figure closest to the house stops moving. Its hands fall away from the others, and the circle breaks, and one by one, they all go still. In the moonlight, I cannot make out their faces. They are pale smudges beneath dark hair, featureless as unfinished sketches. But I can feel them looking at me. I can feel the weight of their attention like a physical pressure against my skin, like being submerged in water that is slowly, inexorably rising. Then the closest one tilts its head back, and the moonlight falls full upon its face, and I see myself. Not as I am now, 43, gray at the temples, deep lines carved around my mouth from years of clenching my jaw against words I never learned to speak, but as I was when I was 6 years old and living in this house with parents who are now 20 years dead, and a future that seemed infinite and unknowable and bright with possibility. The face looking up at me is my own face from 37 years ago. The same slightly crooked front teeth. The same birthmark above the left eyebrow. the same expression I remember from photographs, that peculiar mixture of solemnity and expectation that my mother always said made me look like an old soul in a young body. I stumble backward from the window. My heel catches on the edge of the rug and I go down hard, my tailbone striking the floor with a burst of pain that feels almost welcome, almost grounding, because it is real. It is undeniably physical. It is something I can point to and say, this happened. This is not imagination. This is not the slow unraveling of a mind that has spent too long alone with itself. When I pull myself up and look out the window again, the yard is empty. Oh, I do not sleep for the rest of that night. I sit in the kitchen with every light in the house blazing, drinking coffee that I keep reheating in the microwave because I cannot stomach the thought of it going cold, of anything going cold, of the creeping numbness that waits at the edges of my vision like a predator patient enough to wait for exhaustion to do its work. The sliding glass door is spotless. I cleaned it again 3 days ago, scrubbing until my arms ached, until the glass was so clear it seemed to disappear entirely, leaving only a rectangular portal between the warmth of my kitchen and the darkness beyond. Now, in the harsh fluorescent light, I can see that the handprints have returned. There are more of them this time. They cover the lower half of the door, overlapping, crowded, as though a great number of small figures had pressed themselves against the glass simultaneously, fighting for position, desperate to see inside. Desperate to see me. I approach the door slowly. My reflection materializes in the glass as I draw near. Haggard, hollow-eyed, a man who has not shaved in a week or slept properly in months. Behind my reflection, through the prints and beyond, I can see the backyard in the gray pre-dawn light. The swing set, the overgrown grass, the fence that separates my property from the vacant house behind. And standing at the fence, a figure. It is the same height as the ones I saw dancing. It is wearing the same outdated clothing, dark pants, a white shirt with a collar, suspenders. It is standing perfectly motionless, facing the house, and even at this distance, even in the dim light, I can see that its face is my face, my childhood face, watching me with an expression I cannot read. My hand moves of its own accord toward the door handle. I watch my fingers close around the metal as though they belong to someone else, as though I am a passenger in my own body, observing from a great distance as this stranger who wears my skin prepares to open the door and step outside, and the coffee cup slips from my other hand and shatters on the tile floor. The sound breaks whatever spell had settled over me. I jerk my hand back from the door handle and retreat until my back hits the far wall, my chest heaving, my heart hammering against my ribs with a force that seems capable of cracking bone. When I look at the glass again, the figure is gone. Only the handprints remain, their whorls and ridges clearly visible. A forensic record of impossibilities. I call in sick to work that morning. I call in sick the next day as well, and the day after that. My supervisor leaves a voicemail expressing concern in a tone that suggests the concern is primarily for productivity rather than welfare. A colleague sends a text asking if I'm all right, and I stare at it for 20 minutes before typing back a response that says nothing at all. The days blur together. I stop checking the sliding glass door because the prints multiply each night regardless of how thoroughly I clean them. I stop looking out the bedroom window because I know what I will see. What I always see now every night at 3 a.m. when the laughter wakes me and I lie rigid in my bed, listening to voices that should not exist, singing songs that died with my childhood. But I cannot stop myself from seeing the photographs. They are everywhere in this house. My mother was an obsessive documenter, a woman who believed that moments not captured were moments lost forever, and every wall bears evidence of her conviction. Frames cluster on shelves and hang in hallways, their glass fronts catching light, their contents frozen in the amber of decades past. I begin to notice things about these photographs, things I have never noticed before, despite having walked past them thousands of times. In a picture of my 6th birthday party, there is a figure in the background that I do not recognize, a small shape at the edge of the frame, blurred but distinctly present, wearing clothing that looks exactly like what the figures in my yard have been wearing. In a snapshot of me playing in the backyard, age 7 or 8, the swing set visible behind me. There is a shadow on the grass that does not correspond to any object in the frame, a shadow shaped like a small person, cast from nothing. I pull the photographs from their frames. I examine them under lamplight, under flashlight, under the cold blue glow of my phone screen. And in image after image, I find them. Shapes in the background, figures at windows, shadows that shouldn't exist. They have always been here. In my photographs, in my house, in the periphery of my life. Watching, waiting. My wife calls on a Tuesday. I know it is Tuesday only because she tells me so. Mentions something about the day having significance to her schedule, to the life she is building without me in a city 300 miles away. I hold the phone to my ear and listen to her voice as though it belongs to someone from another planet, another dimension, a reality that operates according to rules I have forgotten how to follow. She asks if I am eating. She asks if I am sleeping. She asks if I have considered speaking to someone. A professional, she means, though she doesn't say it, because we have had this conversation before, and it ended with me hanging up and not answering her calls for 2 weeks. I tell her I am fine. The words come out flat, unconvincing, but she accepts them anyway because acceptance is easier than argument, because she has her own life now, and cannot afford to be pulled back into the undertow of mine. After she hangs up, I sit in the living room and look at the wall of photographs. The afternoon light slants through the blinds, casting bars of brightness across the frames. And in each pool of light, I see movement. Subtle, almost imperceptible. Figures shifting position, faces turning. Faces that are all my face. I understand now. I think I have always understood. Somewhere beneath the comfortable layers of denial and distraction that allow a person to function in a world that makes less sense each passing day. These are not ghosts. These are not hallucinations. These are not intruders or trespassers or symptoms of a mind in freefall. These are me. Every version of myself that ever existed. Every moment captured in a photograph. Every instant frozen in time. They have been here all along, watching from the other side of the glass, the other side of the frame, the other side of whatever membrane separates what we remember from what remembers us. Tonight, I will go outside. The thought arrives with a calm that should frighten me, but doesn't. Tonight, when the laughter starts, when the figures appear in my backyard to dance their eternal circle, I will unlock the sliding glass door and step through and join them. I will take my place in the ring, my hands clasped with theirs, my voice joining the chorus that has been waiting for me to remember the words. Ring around the rosy. I am already reaching for the door handle, pocket full of posies. The glass is cold beneath my palm. Ashes, ashes. Beyond the glass, in the yard that is dark despite the fact that it should still be afternoon, I can see them gathering. 5 figures, 10, 20, 100 versions of myself at every age from 2 to 12, holding hands, waiting, their faces turned toward the house with expressions that might be patience or might be hunger, or might be something so far beyond human emotion that there is no word for it in any language. They begin to chant. We all fall down. I slide the door open. The cold rushes in like water, like forgetting, like the moment before sleep when the self dissolves and something else takes its place. The figures in the yard do not move, but I feel them drawing closer anyway, feel the distance between us collapsing in ways that have nothing to do with physical space. Somewhere behind me, the clock chimes 3 times. I step outside, and in the photographs that cover the walls of the empty house, the house where a man named No One has lived alone for 11 years, waiting for something he could not name, a new figure appears, a tall shape in the background of every image, standing at the edge of frame, joining the others, watching, waiting, for the next one to remember. Story 6. The drain clogged again on a Tuesday. I knelt on the cold bathroom tiles, the grout lines pressing into my knees like thin accusations. and unscrewed the chrome cover with the flathead screwdriver I now kept under the sink. The metal was slick with condensation, and my fingers slipped twice before the last screw came loose. A familiar smell rose from the opening. Wet earth and something older, something that reminded me of the cellar in my grandmother's house, a place I hadn't thought about in 30 years. I reached in with 2 fingers, the way you might reach into a wound, hesitant and already regretting it. The mass came up in a clump, hair matted together with brownish silt, tangled around something small and hard. I held it under the bathroom light, that harsh fluorescent buzz that makes everything look clinical and wrong, and I saw it. A tooth, small, white, with a root that tapered to a delicate point. A baby tooth, the kind children leave under pillows for fairies that never come. This was the 4th week. The first time, I convinced myself it had been there when I moved in. The apartment was old, the previous tenant unknown to me, just a name on a lease I'd never seen. People leave things behind, hair in drains, soap scum on tiles, the faint impressions of their lives pressed into the walls like fossils. A tooth seemed strange, certainly, but not impossible. I threw it away without thinking much about it, wrapped it in toilet paper like a secret, and dropped it in the trash. The second time, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. 2 teeth now, small and perfect, nestled in that same tangle of hair and dirt. I examined them more closely, turning them over in my palm. They were pristine despite where I'd found them, almost luminous in their whiteness. I told myself someone was playing a joke. My neighbor, perhaps, the older woman with the cats who sometimes watched me through her cracked door when I walked to the elevator. She had a strange sense of humor, leaving dead birds on the welcome mats of people who complained about her pets. This seemed like something she might do, though I couldn't imagine how she would access my bathroom. I installed a new lock that weekend, the heavy kind, with a deadbolt that required a key from both sides. The third time, I stopped making excuses. I took the tooth to my dentist, a man I'd been seeing for nearly a decade, whose office smelled perpetually of mint and anxiety. I told him I'd found it and wanted to know if he could identify it. He looked at me the way people look at those who ask questions that shouldn't be asked, but he took it anyway, promised to send it to a lab he knew, a friend who owed him a favor. I didn't tell him where I'd found it. Some things resist explanation even in their telling. The call came 5 days later. I was at work, pretending to focus on a spreadsheet that meant nothing, when my phone vibrated against the desk. His voice sounded different, careful, measured, the way doctors speak when they're about to deliver news that will change the shape of your life. The tooth had my DNA. I asked him to repeat himself. He did, slowly, as if speaking to someone who had forgotten their own language. The tooth was mine. Primary dentition, he said, using words that felt clinical and distant. A deciduous molar shed naturally, probably around age 6 or 7. He asked if I had children. I told him no. He asked if I was certain. I hung up without answering. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed and listened to the apartment breathe around me. The settling of old pipes, the whisper of air through vents I couldn't see, the occasional creak from the floor above that might have been footsteps, or might have been nothing at all. The bathroom door was closed, but I could feel it there. That small dark room with its drain like a mouth, like an opening to somewhere I didn't want to think about. I started keeping the teeth. I don't know why. Some compulsion I couldn't name. Some need to have evidence, proof that this was really happening, that I wasn't losing my grip on something fundamental. I kept them in a glass jar on my nightstand, the kind you might use for spare change or buttons. Every week I added another, sometimes 2. The collection grew, and with it, something else grew too. A feeling I couldn't shake, a presence that seemed to hover at the edge of my perception like a word you can't quite remember. The hair in the drain changed over those weeks. At first it was dark and coarse, the kind of hair that might belong to anyone. But gradually it became finer, lighter. I would hold it up to the light and see copper glints, auburn threads that caught the sun like memories I didn't have. My own hair is dark, almost black. It has been since I was young. But this hair was something else. This hair belonged to someone I didn't know, someone who might have been me in a life I never lived. The dirt changed too. It became darker, richer, with a smell that grew stronger each week. Not just earth now, but something organic, something alive. I found myself leaning closer to it, inhaling deeply despite my revulsion, trying to place that scent. It reminded me of gardens after rain, of freshly turned soil, of places where things are buried and things grow. I began to wonder what might be growing in those pipes, in those dark channels beneath my feet, in the spaces between walls where no light ever reached. I stopped showering at home. I joined a gym 3 blocks away, paid for a membership I couldn't really afford, just so I could use their facilities. The locker room smelled of chlorine and sweat, but it was clean, impersonal, free of whatever was happening in my apartment. I told myself this was temporary, that I would figure out what was going on, that there was a rational explanation waiting to be found if I just looked hard enough. But I kept checking the drain. Every morning before I left for work, and every night before I went to bed, I would kneel on those cold tiles and unscrew that chrome cover and look inside. The compulsion was irresistible, a need that bordered on obsession. Sometimes there was nothing. Sometimes there was everything. Hair and dirt and teeth, always teeth, small and white and impossibly mine. I started dreaming about them. In the dreams, I was underground, moving through tunnels that twisted and turned like the passages of an enormous body. The walls were wet and warm, and they pulsed gently against my skin as I crawled deeper into the darkness. I could hear something ahead of me, a sound like breathing or like water moving through pipes, and I knew that if I kept going, I would find the source. I would find the mouth that opened beneath my shower, the throat that swallowed everything I sent down, the stomach where my teeth waited to be reclaimed. I always woke before I reached it. My wife noticed the changes first. She asked why I looked so tired, why I flinched when the bathroom door opened, why I had started sleeping with the lights on. I told her it was work stress, deadlines, the usual pressures of a life built on obligations. She didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes, that careful assessment wives make when they're deciding whether to push or to wait. She chose to wait. I was grateful for that, even as I resented the distance it created between us, the growing silence that filled the spaces where conversation used to live. I considered telling her. Some nights, lying beside her in the dark, I would open my mouth to speak and find the words stuck somewhere in my throat, lodged there like something I needed to cough up but couldn't. How do you explain that you're finding parts of yourself in places they shouldn't be? How do you describe the terror of looking at something that came from inside you and not recognizing it, not remembering ever losing it? The jar on my nightstand filled slowly. 17 teeth now, arranged in a rough circle at the bottom of the glass, like a smile waiting to form. I would stare at them sometimes, trying to see patterns, trying to understand what they were telling me. I counted them obsessively, though the number never changed. I researched how many baby teeth a person has. 20, the internet told me. 20 small bones that fall out to make room for what comes after. I was 3 teeth away from a complete set. The thought made me nauseous. I called the dentist again, asked him to run more tests. He refused. His voice had changed since our last conversation, had become distant and professional in a way that felt like a door closing. He suggested I see someone else, a different kind of doctor. He used words like specialist and consultation, but we both knew what he meant. He thought I was crazy. He thought I had planted the tooth myself, had manufactured evidence of something that couldn't possibly be real. Maybe he was right. I started to doubt my own memories. Had I always lived in this apartment? Had I always had this job, this wife, this life that felt increasingly like a costume I was wearing? I would catch myself in mirrors and not recognize the face looking back at me. Not because it had changed, but because I couldn't remember ever learning its features, ever becoming familiar with its particular arrangement of eyes and nose and mouth. The drain clogged again last night. I knelt on those tiles, now worn smooth from my constant attention, and I unscrewed the cover with hands that trembled only slightly. The smell was stronger than ever, rich and dark and alive. And when I reached inside, my fingers touched something different, Not just hair and dirt and teeth this time. Something else. Something that moved. I pulled my hand back so fast I scraped my knuckles on the chrome edge, leaving a thin line of blood that dripped onto the white porcelain like an accusation. I sat there for a long time, breathing hard, staring at that dark opening, waiting for something to emerge. Nothing did, but I could hear it now, a sound from deep within the pipes, a rhythm that might have been water flowing or might have been something else entirely. It sounded like breathing. I covered the drain with a towel and left the bathroom. I haven't been back since. The door stays closed now, a line I've drawn in my own home, a boundary I'm afraid to cross. My wife asks why I've started using her bathroom, and I tell her mine needs repairs, that I've called a plumber, that everything will be fixed soon. The jar sits on my nightstand still. 18 teeth now. I don't remember adding the last one. Sometimes in the deep hours of the night, I hear sounds from the other bathroom. Water running, though no one has turned on the tap. A drain gurgling, though nothing has been poured down it. And beneath those sounds, something else. A noise that might be scratching or might be growing. The sound of something working its way up from below, pushing through pipes too narrow for passage, coming to collect what belongs to it. I've started dreaming again. But the dreams are different now. In these dreams, I'm not moving through tunnels. I'm not crawling towards some unknown source. In these dreams, I'm standing in front of a mirror, and I'm opening my mouth. And inside, where my teeth should be, there's only darkness. A hole that goes down and down, past throat and chest and stomach, down through floors and foundation, down into the earth where something waits. And in the mirror, behind my reflection, I can see myself. Another me, younger, smaller, with copper hair that catches the light like something precious. This other me is smiling, and the smile is wrong, too wide and too knowing. And as I watch, it opens its mouth and shows me all the teeth it still has. 20 of them, small and white and perfect. I wake up each morning and I check my own mouth, running my tongue over familiar surfaces, counting what remains. Everything is there. Everything is always there. But the teeth in the jar don't lie, and the dentist's test doesn't lie. And somewhere in this apartment, or beneath it, or inside it, something is happening that I can't explain and can't escape. My wife is sleeping beside me now. I'm writing this in the dark, on my phone, the light from the screen the only illumination in a room that feels smaller every night. I can hear the bathroom from here, the one with the drain, the one I've sealed with a towel that's surely soaked through by now. The sound is louder tonight, not just breathing anymore. Something else. Something that sounds almost like laughter, or like crying, or like the noise a child might make when it's finally ready to come home. I have 2 teeth left to find. I don't know what happens when the collection is complete. I don't want to know, but I can feel it coming anyway, rising up through pipes and drains and all the dark places where things are hidden, moving toward me with a patience that spans years, that spans decades, that spans the entire distance between who I was and who I'm becoming. The drain clogs every week, always the same thing, and I'm running out of teeth to lose. Story 7. The static came first, a soft hiss bleeding through the monitor's speaker at 2:47 a.m., pulling me from a dreamless sleep. I lay there in the dark, listening to the white noise crackle and pop like distant radio signals from a station that no longer exists. The green light on the receiver pulsed steadily on my nightstand, confirming what I already knew. The device was working. The room it watched was not. We bought the monitor 3 weeks ago. My wife found it at an estate sale 2 towns over, tucked between porcelain figurines and moth-eaten quilts in a cardboard box labeled nursery. She thought it was charming, the vintage design with its rounded edges and analog dials. I thought it was unnecessary. The spare bedroom at the end of the hall had been empty for 7 years, ever since we moved into this house. We'd painted it once, a pale yellow that has since faded to the color of old teeth. We never discussed what it was supposed to become. Some silences between married people grow so old they calcify into something permanent. But my wife insisted. She'd been having trouble sleeping, she said. She wanted to hear if anything stirred in the night. I didn't ask what she expected to stir. I simply nodded, plugged the transmitter into the wall outlet in that empty room, and placed the receiver beside our bed. For the first week, nothing. Silence so complete it felt almost aggressive. Then the static began. I started keeping a notebook. My therapist, a thin woman with reading glasses perpetually perched on her forehead, suggested it years ago during what she called my difficult period. I never used it then. Now I find myself reaching for it in the dark, scribbling observations I can barely read come morning. Night 4, static at 3:12 a.m., M, duration, 7 minutes, rhythmic quality, almost like breathing. Night 6, interference pattern, 3 bursts, pause, 3 bursts, repeated 5 times. Night 9, something beneath the static, a tone, low, sustained. My wife sleeps through all of it. She's always been a deep sleeper, the kind who could rest through thunderstorms and car alarms. I envy that about her. I've always been the opposite, a man who wakes at the slightest shift in atmospheric pressure, who lies awake cataloging the sounds of a settling house, the creak of floorboards, the tick of pipes cooling, the particular groan our bedroom door makes when the humidity changes. I know this house. I know its voice. The sounds from the monitor are not part of that vocabulary. It was a Tuesday when I first heard the melody. I'd been awake for perhaps an hour, staring at the ceiling, when the static shifted. The white noise seemed to part like curtains, and beneath it, threaded through it, came a sequence of notes. Simple, repetitive. The kind of tune you might hum without thinking. The melodic equivalent of muscle memory. A lullaby. I sat up so quickly my vision spotted. The green light pulsed. The melody continued, distant and warped, as if traveling through water to reach me. I couldn't identify it at first, couldn't place where I'd heard it before. But my body knew. My skin prickled with recognition, goose flesh racing up my arms, and somewhere deep in my chest, something clenched. The song lasted perhaps 90 seconds. Then the static swallowed it whole, and I was left sitting in the dark, my heart hammering against my ribs, certain of only one thing. I knew that voice. I just couldn't remember how. The empty room became an obsession. I found myself standing in its doorway at odd hours, studying the bare walls, the single window with its yellowed blinds, the outlet where the transmitter sat plugged in and waiting. The carpet held faint impressions where furniture had once stood. A rectangular shadow near the far wall where a crib might have been, circular indentations that could have belonged to a rocking chair. The previous owners must have had plans for this space. Everyone who enters this room seems to have plans that never materialize. I asked my wife if she'd heard anything unusual. She looked at me with that particular expression she reserves for my episodes, concern tempered with exhaustion, and said no, she'd been sleeping wonderfully, better than she had in months actually. Wasn't it strange how the monitor had actually helped? I didn't tell her about the lullaby. I didn't tell her about the notebook filling with observations, or the way I'd started recording the monitor's output on my phone, playing back the static at half speed, listening for patterns beneath the noise. I didn't tell her that I'd found them. The photograph surfaced on a Thursday. My mother had been cleaning out her attic, a project she'd been threatening to undertake for decades, and mailed me a box of what she called family ephemera. Old letters, report cards from elementary school, a collection of my father's military pins, and at the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper gone brown with age, a photograph I'd never seen. The woman in the image sat in a rocking chair, her face turned slightly away from the camera. The photo was black and white, the edges scalloped in that way old photographs have, and something about her posture, the angle of her shoulders, the way her hands rested in her lap, struck me as deeply familiar. On the back, in handwriting I didn't recognize, Mother, 1962. 6 months before. My grandmother. She died in 1963. During complications from a surgery my mother never fully explained. I was born in 1989. 26 years separated her death from my first breath. I never knew her voice, never heard her speak, never had the chance to be held in those hands now frozen in silver halide. And yet, I stared at the photograph until my vision blurred. Then I went to the empty room, stood in its center, and waited for night to fall. The voice came clearer now. Each night the static would part, and the lullaby would emerge, stronger, more defined, as if whatever transmitted it was moving closer to the frequency I could receive. I recorded everything, played it back through headphones with the volume maxed, straining to hear the words woven through the melody. On the 12th night, I heard my name, not spoken, sung, drawn out across 3 notes, tender and familiar, the way a mother might sing to a restless infant, the way a grandmother might sing to a grandchild she would never meet. I should have been terrified. Part of me was that primal part that recognizes wrongness, that screams at us to flee from dark caves and deep water, but stronger than the fear was something else. A pull, a gravity that had been acting on me since the first night of static, drawing me toward that empty room at the end of the hall. I began sleeping there. My wife found me the first morning, curled on the bare carpet with the transmitter clutched to my chest. She didn't yell. She simply stood in the doorway, backlit by the hall light, and asked if I was feeling all right. I told her I'd been sleepwalking. She didn't believe me. I didn't expect her to. The following night, I brought a pillow. Time began to slip. I would blink and find hours had passed, the light outside the window shifting from black to gray to the pale gold of early morning. My wife started sleeping in the guest room, not the empty room, never that one, and our conversations dwindled to logistics. Grocery lists, utility bills, the transactional language of a marriage under strain. I stopped seeing my therapist, stopped returning calls from my office. The world outside this house grew muffled and distant, a radio station slowly sliding out of range. The only signal that mattered now came through the monitor, growing stronger each night, the lullaby expanding into something larger, a voice that spoke between the notes, whispering things I couldn't quite understand but felt in my marrow. She told me about the family, not in words, in impressions, flashes of memory that weren't mine. A kitchen with checkered linoleum, the smell of bread baking, a view of a backyard I'd never seen but recognized with the ache of nostalgia. She showed me what she'd wanted for my mother, for me, for all the generations she never got to meet. She showed me the empty room as it should have been, filled with warmth and laughter and the particular chaos of a loved child. She sang my name over and over, and I wept on that bare carpet, grieving a woman I'd never known, mourning a connection that death had severed before it could begin. My wife found the notebook. I came downstairs one morning to find her at the kitchen table, the journal open before her, her face pale. She asked me what it all meant, the times, the observations, the increasingly erratic handwriting that I barely recognized as my own. She pointed to an entry from the night before, a passage I had no memory of writing. She says the room isn't empty. She says it was never empty. She says I've been here before, dreaming in the dark, waiting to be born. She says I can come back. She says the signal goes both ways. I couldn't explain it. I tried, stumbled through something about grief and stress and the strange acoustics of old houses. But my wife's expression didn't change. She closed the notebook and said she thought we should talk to someone. A professional. Maybe more than one. I agreed, because agreeing was easier than explaining. And besides, what could I possibly say? That my dead grandmother was contacting me through a baby monitor, that a woman who died a quarter century before my birth was singing lullabies, meant for a grandchild she never held? That the empty room at the end of our hall was not empty at all, but crowded with something I couldn't see but could feel pressing against the walls of reality, trying to break through? I agreed, and my wife made phone calls, and I smiled and nodded at all the right moments. And each night, I returned to the room. Last night, the static stopped. For the first time in weeks, the monitor fell silent. No hiss, no crackle, No lullaby drifting up from frequencies that shouldn't exist. Just a vast and terrible quiet, the absence of sound so complete it seemed to have weight. I lay on the carpet, waiting. The green light pulsed. The blinds filtered pale moonlight into stripes across the floor. And then, not from the monitor, but from somewhere inside the room itself, inside the walls, or beneath the floor, or perhaps inside my own skull, I heard her voice. Clear, unmistakable. She said my name. Not sung this time. Spoken. The way you might speak to someone sitting right beside you. The way you might greet a loved one you haven't seen in a very long time. And then she said something else. 3 words that I can't write down, can't even fully remember, but that I felt settle into my bones with the weight of absolute truth. I turned my head. In the corner of the room, where shadows gathered thickest, where the moonlight couldn't reach, something was there. Not a shape, not a figure, something more like a density, a place where the darkness became more itself, where the air grew heavy and cold, and smelled faintly of lavender and bread and old wool. It moved toward me. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I simply lay there, watching the darkness approach, listening to the lullaby start up again. Not from the monitor, but from everywhere. From the walls and the floor and the spaces between heartbeats, she sang my name, and the darkness reached the edge of my vision, and I understood finally what she had been trying to show me. The room wasn't empty. It had never been empty. This morning my wife asked why I was smiling. I told her I'd slept well. She looked at the monitor on my nightstand. I'd brought the receiver back, no longer needing to be in that room to hear the signal, and said she was glad. She said I seemed calmer, more present, almost like my old self. I nodded. I agreed. I did not tell her about the new sound I'd begun to hear beneath the static. A second voice, fainter than the first, still learning the melody. I did not tell her that the voice sounded like mine, or rather, like mine might sound if I were singing from somewhere very far away, trying to reach someone who hadn't been born yet. I did not tell her that when I looked in the mirror this morning, just for a moment, my reflection's mouth was moving, and it was singing. The lullaby plays on, even now, threading through the static of daily life. I hear it in the hum of the refrigerator, in the rush of water through pipes, in the particular frequency of my wife's breathing as she sleeps beside me, unaware of the signal bleeding through the walls of this house, this room, this body. My grandmother is still singing, and I am starting to sing back. Story 8. The attic window is open again. I discovered it this morning, same as every morning for the past 3 weeks. The latch I installed, the industrial one rated for hurricane force winds, hangs loose from the frame, screws stripped clean as if pulled by something that didn't care about resistance. Cold October air pours through the gap, carrying the wet decay of fallen leaves and something else, something that smells faintly of copper and soil. My wife thinks I'm obsessing. She said as much last night, her voice careful in that way it gets when she's choosing diplomacy over honesty. She doesn't come up here anymore. Claims the stairs are too steep, that the dust aggravates her allergies. But I've seen the way she looks at the ceiling when we're lying in bed. The way her eyes trace the creaking footsteps that sometimes move across the boards above us. Footsteps I've convinced myself are settling wood, thermal expansion, the house breathing. I've tried everything. The first week I simply locked the window. Standard brass latch, nothing special. Found it open the next morning. The latch still engaged, but somehow on the wrong side of the strike plate, as if the window had passed through it like water through a sieve. I told myself I'd installed it incorrectly, reversed the mechanism in my exhaustion. The second week, I nailed it shut. 8 3-inch finishing nails driven at angles through the frame, pinning the window in place with enough force to crack the old wood. The next morning, the nails were gone. Not pulled out. Gone. I searched the floor on my hands and knees, running my palms across the rough planks until splinters embedded themselves in my skin. I found nothing except a fine layer of rust-colored dust in the shape of a crescent moon. Then I tried welding. Borrowed equipment from my brother-in-law without explaining why. just mumbled something about a project. I sealed the entire frame with beads of molten metal, transforming the window into a permanent fixture, a dead eye in the face of the house. The next morning, the welds had fractured in a perfect line, splitting apart like a mouth opening to speak. Yesterday, I used silicone, 3 tubes of industrial-grade sealant, the kind they use on aquariums that hold thousands of gallons. I filled every gap, every seam, created an airtight barrier between the window and the world. I went to bed with the chemical smell still burning my nostrils, certain that nothing could breach that seal. This morning, I found the silicone peeled away in long strips, curled on the floor like shed skin, and that's when I saw the fingerprints. They were pressed into the glass from the inside, 5 distinct marks arranged in a pattern I recognized immediately as a handprint. But the orientation was wrong. The fingers pointed upward, toward the top of the frame, and the smudges streaked in the same direction, as if something had gripped the glass while climbing, while pulling itself up and out. I stood there for a long time, my breath fogging the cold air, staring at those prints. They were too large to be my wife's, too narrow to be mine. The fingers were long, impossibly long, and spaced at intervals that made my stomach clench with wrongness. I pressed my own hand against the glass, trying to match them. My fingertips fell short by at least 2 inches. The house has started feeling different. I notice it most in the evenings, when the light fails and shadows pool in the corners like dark water. There's a weight to the silence now, a thickness that presses against my eardrums and makes me strain to hear sounds that may not exist. Sometimes I catch movement at the edge of my vision, a flickering, a shifting. But when I turn, there's nothing. Just empty space, and the lingering impression that something was there a moment ago, watching. My wife has started sleeping with her back to me. She says it's more comfortable, but I've caught her awake in the small hours, eyes fixed on the ceiling, lips moving without sound. When I ask what she's saying, she claims she wasn't saying anything. When I ask what she's looking at, she tells me to go back to sleep. I can't sleep. Not really. I drift in and out of something that feels like unconsciousness but provides no rest, surfacing repeatedly to find my body rigid, my fingers clutching the sheets, my eyes already open and staring at the darkness above. Sometimes I think I hear footsteps. Sometimes I think I hear my own name, spoken in a voice that sounds like wind through cracked wood. 3 nights ago, I woke to find myself standing at the base of the attic stairs. I don't remember getting out of bed. I don't remember walking through the house in the dark, navigating the hallway and the narrow passage that leads to the stairs. But there I was, my feet bare on the cold floor, my hand already reaching for the doorknob. My palm was pressed against the wood, and I could feel something on the other side, a vibration, a warmth, like the door was breathing. I went back to bed. I didn't go up. I'm not sure why. The next morning, there were scratches on my forearms, 4 parallel lines, shallow but raw, as if fingernails had been dragged across my skin. I showed my wife. She said I must have done it in my sleep, catching myself on the nightstand or the headboard. She didn't look at the scratches when she said it. She looked at a point just past my shoulder, her eyes unfocused, her voice flat. I've started documenting everything. I bought a notebook, cheap, spiral-bound, the kind they sell at gas stations, and I write in it every morning. The time I wake, the state of the window, any marks on my body, any gaps in my memory. I record the temperature, the quality of light, the exact position of objects in the attic. I'm looking for patterns, for evidence, for something concrete I can point to and say, this is real, this is happening, this is not inside my head. The problem is that the patterns I'm finding don't make sense. The window opens more frequently on nights when I dream of climbing. In the dreams, I'm scaling something tall. A wall, a cliff face, sometimes the exterior of my own house. And my hands find holds in places that shouldn't have them. The brick becomes soft, yielding. The wood opens to receive my fingers. I climb and climb, moving toward something at the top that I can't see but desperately need to reach. I wake, gasping, my fingernails caked with debris, and the window is open. I've started finding things in the attic that I don't remember putting there. Small objects mostly. A comb with several teeth missing. A button from a shirt I no longer own. A photograph of a house I've never seen. The image faded and water-stained. The structure itself familiar in a way I can't explain. These items appear on the windowsill, arranged with care, as if placed there for someone to find, for someone to take. Last Tuesday I found a tooth. Human, adult, the root still attached and dark with old blood. I held it in my palm for a long time, feeling its weight, its realness, the undeniable fact of its existence. Then I put it back on the windowsill because I didn't know what else to do with it. The next morning it was gone. My wife suggested I see someone. A professional, she meant. Someone who could help me sort through what she called my fixation. She used that word carefully, loading it with implication, and I understood what she was really saying. She thinks I'm losing my mind. She thinks the window is just a window, and the fingerprints are smudges, and the objects are things I've collected in sleepwalking fugues and forgotten about. Maybe she's right. But if she's right, then what's making the footsteps? What's leaving the scratches? What stands in the corner of our bedroom at 3 a.m, a shape I can almost see when I wake from dreams of climbing, a figure that dissolves like smoke when I try to focus. I saw it clearly for the first time last night. I was in the attic, checking the window by flashlight, watching my breath crystallize in the beam. The temperature had dropped suddenly, sharply, as if all the warmth had been pulled from the room at once. The hairs on my arms rose. My skin prickled with the primitive awareness of being watched. I turned slowly. The corner was darker than it should have been, darker than the flashlight could penetrate, a void that absorbed the beam and gave nothing back. And within that darkness, something moved. Not walking, not floating, unfolding. That's the only word for it. As if something compressed had been released, expanding outward in segments, joints articulating in directions that made my eyes water with incomprehension. I saw fingers, long fingers, too long, reaching toward me with the same spread I'd seen pressed into the glass. And I understood, in that moment, that they weren't climbing out. They were climbing back in. I ran. I don't remember descending the stairs or slamming the door or collapsing into bed beside my sleeping wife. But I remember lying there afterward, listening to the footsteps move across the ceiling, steady and deliberate, tracking from the far wall to the spot directly above our heads. They stopped there. They haven't moved since. That was 12 hours ago. I've been sitting in the kitchen since dawn, writing this account, trying to make sense of something senseless. My wife left for work without speaking to me. She paused at the door, her hand on the frame, and for a moment I thought she was going to say something important. Instead, she just looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Fear, maybe, or pity, or something worse. And then she was gone. The house is silent now. The footsteps have stopped. The attic door remains closed at the end of the hall, and I haven't been able to bring myself to look at it directly. But I can feel it. I can feel the weight of what waits beyond, the patient presence of something that has been climbing in and out of my life for weeks, leaving traces, taking pieces. I found something new this morning, in the notebook where I've been documenting everything. A page near the end, filled with handwriting I don't recognize. The letters are angular, slashing, pressed so hard into the paper that the pen tore through in places. It's a list of dates, 15 of them, spanning the past 3 weeks, and next to each date is a single word. Almost. The last entry is today's date. Next to it, in that same jagged script, someone has written, "Ready." I don't know what it means. I don't know if I wrote it myself in some fugue state, my hand guided by something beyond my understanding, or if something else held the pen. I don't know if the window is a door, or if the door is inside me, or if there's even a difference anymore. What I know is this: it's getting dark outside. The shadows are pooling in the corners again, thick and patient. And somewhere above me, in the attic, I can hear the window opening. I can hear something climbing. I don't know which direction it's going. I don't know if I want to find out. But my feet are moving anyway, carrying me toward the stairs, and my hand is already reaching for the doorknob. And some part of me, some small, terrified part, is beginning to wonder if I've ever really been the one deciding to climb. Story 9. The intercom buzzes at 2:14 a.m. I know the time because I've been watching it crawl across the face of my alarm clock for the past hour, waiting. The red digits have become my only companions in this dark bedroom, their glow painting everything in the color of warning. I don't move. The sheets are damp with sweat despite the February cold seeping through the window seams, and my wife sleeps beside me with the particular stillness of someone who has taken her medication. She won't wake. She never does anymore. The buzzer sounds again. 3 short pulses, then silence. On the small screen mounted by my bedroom door, the one connected to the building's entrance camera, I can see the lobby below. Empty. The fluorescent lights flicker with their usual sickly rhythm, casting shadows across the mailboxes and the artificial plant that has been dying slowly for as long as I've lived here. But there's no one standing at the intercom panel. The display in the corner of the screen reads, "Call from APT 704. I live in apartment 704. This is the 4th night in a row. The first time it happened, I assumed it was a malfunction. Old buildings have old wiring, old systems that glitch and stutter like the minds of the elderly. I mentioned it to the superintendent the next morning, a heavy-set man with thick fingers and a perpetual expression of exhaustion. He said he would look into it. He said this while scrolling through his phone, not meeting my eyes, and I knew he wouldn't. The second night, I answered. I remember pressing the talk button, my finger trembling slightly, though I told myself it was just the cold, just the lack of sleep that had been accumulating like sediment at the bottom of my skull. I said hello into the speaker, and for a moment there was only static, the white noise of dead air that sounds exactly like whispered secrets if you listen too closely. Then a voice responded. It asked if it could come up. It said it was cold outside. The voice was mine. Not similar to mine, not a close approximation that could be explained by the distortion of cheap speakers and electrical interference. It was my voice. The exact cadence, the specific way I swallow certain syllables when I'm tired. The slight rasp that has lived in my throat since a childhood illness left its mark on my vocal cords. I know my own voice. We all do. In that uncomfortable way, we recognize ourselves in recordings and mirrors and wonder if that's really how others perceive us. This was me, speaking to me, from 7 floors below. I didn't respond. I stood there in the darkness of my hallway, the intercom's green light blinking patiently, and I listened to myself breathe on the other end of the line. Then the call ended, and I spent the rest of the night sitting in my living room with every light on, watching the door. The third night I didn't answer at all. I lay in bed and listened to the buzzer. Once, twice, 5 times, 12, and I pressed my pillow over my ears like a child hiding from thunderstorms. My wife stirred once, muttered something about work in the morning, and sank back into her chemical sleep. I envied her. I envied the pharmaceutical barrier between her consciousness and whatever was happening to mine. Now it's the 4th night, and something has changed. I get up. My feet touch the cold hardwood floor, and the sensation grounds me in a way that feels almost violent, a sharp reminder that I am real, that I am here, that this body belongs to me and no one else. The bedroom door creaks as I open it. When did it start creaking? And I walk down the hallway toward the intercom. The screen shows the empty lobby. The call notification continues to pulse. I press the button. There's a long moment of nothing, and I start to believe that maybe this time it really is a malfunction. Just faulty wiring and aging circuits, and my own paranoia constructing meaning where none exists. Then the static clears, and I hear breathing. My breathing. The specific rhythm of air entering and leaving my lungs. A sound I know more intimately than my own heartbeat. The voice asks if it can come up. It says the same thing it said before, word for word, with the same intonation. Can I come up? It's cold down here. But this time it adds something. It says it's been waiting for a long time. I end the call. My hand is shaking now, and I can't pretend it's the cold. I walk to the window that overlooks the street, 7 floors below, and I push aside the curtain. The sidewalk is empty. The streetlights cast their orange cones of illumination onto pavement slick with frost, and parked cars crouch along the curb like sleeping animals. Nothing moves. Nothing is there. But I feel watched. The sensation crawls up my spine like cold fingers tracing each vertebra, settling at the base of my skull with an almost physical weight. Someone is looking at me. I scan the windows of the building across the street, the dark mouths of alleyways, the spaces between things where shadows pool and thicken. There's nothing. There's no one. I close the curtain. I double-check the locks on the front door, the deadbolt, the chain, the secondary latch I installed 3 months ago after a string of break-ins in the neighborhood that may or may not have actually happened. I can't remember now where I heard about them. The news, perhaps. A neighbor. My own imagination. The lines have started to blur. I don't go back to bed. Instead, I sit in my kitchen with a glass of water I won't drink, watching the digital clock on the microwave mark the slow passage of time. The refrigerator hums its constant monotone hymn. Somewhere in the walls, pipes groan as the building settles, and I find myself listening for patterns in the noise, for voices in the white static of infrastructure. At 3:47 a.m., I hear footsteps in the hallway outside my door. They're slow, deliberate. The measured pace of someone who knows exactly where they're going and is in no hurry to get there. I stand so quickly that I knock my chair backward, and it clatters against the tile with a sound that seems obscenely loud in the silence. The footsteps stop. Right outside my door. I don't move. I don't breathe. I stand in my kitchen, 5 meters from the entrance to my apartment, and I wait. The silence stretches until it becomes a physical presence, a pressure against my eardrums that makes me want to scream just to break it. Then I hear a voice, muffled by the door but unmistakable. It's humming. A melody I recognize, something my mother used to sing when I was young. A lullaby whose words I've long forgotten but whose tune has lodged itself in the deepest parts of my memory. No one else knows this song. It was never recorded, never written down. It exists only in the minds of my mother, myself, and now whatever is standing on the other side of my door. The humming stops. I hear a soft sound, like fingers brushing against wood. I want to look through the peephole. The rational part of my brain insists that I need to see, need to know, need to gather evidence so that tomorrow I can call someone. The police, a doctor, anyone who can explain what's happening or confirm that nothing is happening at all. But my body refuses to move. Some ancient instinct, older than language or thought, has frozen me in place. Prey recognizing predator. The silence returns. Minutes pass, or hours, I can't tell anymore. And eventually I hear the footsteps again, retreating down the hallway toward the stairwell. A door opens and closes. Then nothing. I stand in my kitchen until the gray light of dawn begins to seep through the windows, and only then do I allow myself to move. In the morning, I check the hallway. The carpet is undisturbed. There are no muddy footprints, no sign that anyone was there. I ride the elevator down to the lobby and examine the intercom panel, pressing buttons, looking for glitches. Everything functions normally. The superintendent passes through on his way to check the boiler, and I ask him if anyone reported problems with the system last night. He looks at me strangely. He says I'm the only one who has mentioned anything about the intercom. He says this with a careful tone, the way people speak to those they suspect might be unraveling. That night, I sleep in the living room. Or rather, I don't sleep. I sit in my armchair and watch the door and wait. The buzzer sounds at 2:14 a.m. Same as always. I don't answer. The screen shows the empty lobby, the flickering lights, the dying plant. Call from app 704. But this time, I also see something else. In the corner of the screen, barely visible in the camera's limited field of view, there's a shadow. It might be a person standing just out of frame, or it might be nothing. A trick of the poor resolution, a smudge on the lens, the suggestion of a shape where no shape exists. I stare at it until my eyes burn, trying to make sense of what I'm seeing. The shadow moves, It slides out of frame entirely, and I hear, or imagine I hear, the distant sound of elevator cables beginning to turn. The next 30 seconds are the longest of my life. I sit in my chair and watch the door and listen to the mechanical heartbeat of the building, the gears and pulleys that I've never thought about before now screaming into sudden significance. The elevator is old, slow, and I count the floors in my head. 1, 2, 3. It stops on 4. I wait. 1 minute. 2. Nothing happens. I'm beginning to think I imagined the whole thing. I'm beginning to hope I imagined the whole thing. When I hear a sound from the hallway, not footsteps this time, something softer, something like fabric brushing against a wall. Then the buzzer inside my apartment goes off. Not the intercom, the doorbell. I stare at the front door. There's no mail slot, no window, nothing but solid wood and 3 locks between me and whatever is on the other side. The buzzer rings again, patient and persistent, and I realize with a cold certainty that whoever is out there knows I'm in here, knows I'm awake, knows I'm listening. My wife calls from the bedroom, her voice thick with sleep and pills. She asks who's at the door at this hour. She asks if everything is okay. I don't answer her. I can't. Because through the thin membrane of the door, I hear something that makes my blood congeal in my veins. I hear my own voice, answering her. It tells her everything is fine. It tells her to go back to sleep. It uses the same words I would use, the same soft reassurances I've given her countless times before. She murmurs something I can't make out, and then there's silence from the bedroom. I stand alone in my living room, staring at a door that hasn't opened, listening to the absence of sound, and I understand something terrible. The voice outside has stopped. The presence has withdrawn. But I no longer trust the silence, because if it can speak with my voice, answer with my words, know the things that only I should know, then how can I be certain that I am still me? How do I know that the thing in the hallway didn't find its way inside weeks ago, months ago, that it hasn't been slowly replacing me piece by piece while I slept? How do I know that I'm not the one who has been standing in the lobby at 2 a.m., looking up at my own window, asking to be let in from the cold? My wife shifts in her sleep. Somewhere in the walls the pipes settle. The clock reads 2:47 a.m. I sit down slowly, carefully, and I wait for morning. I'm still not sure which one of us will see it. Story 10. The coffee was still steaming when I came downstairs. 2 cups, 2 plates, 4 slices of toast arranged in a neat square on the ceramic dish my mother gave me before she passed. The butter had already been spread. Thin, precise strokes that left no excess at the edges. I stood at the kitchen doorway for a long moment, my bare feet cold against the tile, watching the steam curl upward and dissolve into the morning light that filtered through the blinds. I live alone. I have lived alone for 3 years now, ever since my wife left. The divorce was quiet, almost polite in its finality, and when she walked out the door with her suitcases, she took with her the habit of breakfast for 2. I learned to make coffee for 1. I stopped buying the orange marmalade she loved. I let the second chair at the table collect dust until I finally moved it to the garage, where it sat beside forgotten boxes and a lawnmower that hadn't worked since the previous summer. But now the chair was back, and something, had set the table. The first time it happened, I convinced myself I had done it in my sleep. Sleepwalking, perhaps. Stress-induced automatism. My therapist had warned me about the ways grief and loneliness could manifest, about the tricks an isolated mind could play on itself. I drank the coffee. It was perfect. Exactly how I take it, black with half a spoon of sugar. And I ate the toast, and I told myself this was nothing. A glitch in the machinery of my consciousness. Nothing more. But it happened again the next morning, and the morning after that. By the 4th day, I started leaving markers. A piece of tape on the refrigerator door, a hair balanced on the bread bag's twist tie, small invisible tests that would reveal any tampering. Each morning, I would find them undisturbed, yet the table would still be set, the coffee still hot, the toast still golden and waiting, as if whatever prepared this breakfast existed in some parallel space where my traps held no meaning. I began sleeping with my bedroom door locked. I installed a camera in the kitchen, a cheap thing I ordered online, the kind with night vision and motion detection. The first night I barely slept, checking the app on my phone every few minutes, watching the grainy green footage of my empty kitchen. Nothing moved, nothing entered. At 5:47 a.m., just before dawn, the feed turned to static for exactly 11 seconds. When the image returned, the table was set. I watched that footage perhaps 50 times. I slowed it down, frame by frame, searching for some flicker of movement, some shadow that might explain what I was seeing. There was nothing. One moment, an empty table. A burst of visual noise. Then, 2 cups, 2 plates, toast and butter and steam rising from coffee that had not existed 11 seconds before. My therapist suggested I might be experiencing dissociative episodes. She used words like fugue state and somnambulism, and the mind's remarkable capacity for self-deception. She increased my medication. She told me to keep a journal. She did not look at me with the same ease she once had, and I noticed how she positioned herself slightly closer to the door during our sessions, how her hand would occasionally drift toward the panic button beneath her desk. I stopped telling her about the breakfasts after that. The thing about living with something impossible is that you begin to accommodate it. You adjust. You learn to step around the edges of your terror and function within its boundaries. I would come downstairs each morning, and I would sit at my place and I would eat what had been prepared for me. I told myself this was coping. This was adaptation. This was survival. But then came the morning I found the second chair warm. I had touched it by accident, reaching across to grab the sugar bowl that had somehow migrated to the other side of the table. My fingers brushed the wooden backrest, and I felt it, a lingering heat, as if someone had been sitting there moments before, as if they had risen just as I descended the stairs. The cushion held an indentation, a subtle compression in the fabric that suggested weight, presence, a body that had occupied that space in the recent past. I stood frozen for what felt like hours. My heart performed a strange, arrhythmic percussion against my ribs. The kitchen seemed to shrink around me, the walls pressing inward, the ceiling lowering imperceptibly. I could smell something beneath the aroma of coffee and toast, something organic and faintly sweet, like overripe fruit or flowers left too long in stagnant water. That was when I noticed the toast. The slice on the second plate had been bitten. I could see the marks clearly. A crescent shape removed from the corner, the bread's texture torn rather than cut. I leaned closer, my breath fogging in the suddenly cold air, and I studied those marks with the desperate attention of a man searching for evidence of his own sanity. The teeth that had made those impressions were not arranged like human teeth. The spacing was wrong, too uniform, too numerous. The individual marks were smaller than they should have been, needle-thin points rather than the flat edges of incisors and molars. Whatever had taken that bite possessed a mouth configured in ways that defied my understanding of anatomy. I did not eat breakfast that morning. I sat at the table for a very long time, staring at that bitten toast, feeling the warmth slowly fade from the chair across from me, listening to the house settle and creak around me like a living thing adjusting its bones. The days that followed brought new details, new impossibilities to catalog. I would find wet footprints on the kitchen floor, small, misshapen, with too many toes. I would discover scratches on the inside of cabinet doors, as if something had been trying to get out. The coffee began to taste different, sweeter than I made it, with an underlying note of something I couldn't identify, something that made my tongue feel thick and strange. I set up more cameras. I covered every angle, every corner, every inch of that kitchen. The result was always the same. Static, 11 seconds, and then breakfast for 2. My neighbor, an elderly woman who lived alone in the house to my left, mentioned that she had seen lights in my kitchen window at odd hours. She said this casually over the fence while watering her roses, but her eyes held a question she was too polite to ask. I told her I'd been having trouble sleeping. I told her I sometimes came downstairs to read. I did not tell her that I had stopped going into the kitchen after dark, that I'd begun keeping a flashlight by my bed and a chair wedged beneath my bedroom door handle. The smell grew stronger. That sweet, rotting sweetness began to permeate the entire house. I scrubbed every surface with bleach. I checked for dead animals in the walls, for gas leaks, for mold. I found nothing. The smell persisted, concentrated most heavily in the kitchen, hovering around that second chair like an invisible presence. I began to hear sounds at night. Soft sounds, easily dismissed. The creak of floorboards, the settling of old wood, the ambiguous whispers of a house that had stood for decades before I was born. But there was a rhythm to them now, a pattern that suggested movement, suggested purpose. Something was walking through my home in the darkness. Something was pacing the halls while I lay rigid in my bed, listening, not breathing, waiting for the footsteps to stop outside my door. They never did. They always passed by, but each night they seemed to pause a little longer. I called in sick to work. Then I called in sick again. My supervisor's voice carried a note of concern that bordered on suspicion, and I knew I was running out of excuses, running out of rope. But I could not leave the house. I had become convinced that my absence was what allowed it to happen, that if I simply stayed awake, stayed vigilant, stayed present, I would finally catch it in the act. I would finally see what shared my home. I started sleeping in the kitchen. I brought down a sleeping bag and positioned myself in the corner, facing the table, determined to keep watch through the night. The first few hours were unbearable. The silence pressed against my ears like physical weight, and every shadow seemed to shift at the edge of my vision. But exhaustion eventually won, and I drifted into a thin, restless sleep filled with dreams of impossible architecture and mouths with too many teeth. I woke to the smell of coffee. The table was set. The toast was made. The second chair was warm, so warm it almost burned my palm when I touched it. And there, on the window above the sink, written in condensation that had not been there when I closed my eyes, were 3 words. You looked peaceful. I did not scream. I think I had moved beyond screaming by then, into some quieter realm of horror where the body simply stops responding to terror in conventional ways. I sat down at my usual place. I picked up my coffee cup with hands that trembled only slightly, and I drank. It tasted different that morning. Richer, warmer, like it had been made with something other than water, something thicker and darker that coated my throat as I swallowed. I set the cup down and looked at the writing on the window, already fading as the morning sun heated the glass. I live alone. I have always lived alone, if I am being honest with myself. Even when my wife was here, I was alone inside my own head, trapped in the labyrinth of my own thoughts, unable to truly connect with another person. Perhaps that is why she left. Perhaps that is what drew this thing to me, the recognition of kindred isolation, of shared solitude, of 2 creatures existing in the margins of the world. I do not know what sits across from me each morning. I do not know if it is real in any sense that matters, or if it is a manifestation of my deteriorating mind, a symptom given form by years of loneliness and loss. My therapist would say the latter. The part of me that still believes in logic, in causality, in the ordered universe of science and reason, wants to agree with her. But the chair is always warm, the teeth marks are always wrong, and the coffee is always perfect, exactly how I take it, as if something has been watching me for a very long time, learning my habits, studying my preferences, preparing for the day when it would finally make itself known. I have stopped setting traps. I have stopped checking the cameras. I have accepted in some deep and fundamental part of myself that there will be no answers, no explanations, no satisfying resolution to this mystery. There is only the ritual, the table set for 2, the breakfast waiting, the presence that hovers just beyond my perception like a word caught on the tip of my tongue. This morning, I came downstairs and found something new. A 3rd cup, a 3rd plate, a 3rd chair pulled up to the table as if making room for another guest. I sat down in my usual place. I looked at the 2 empty chairs across from me, the original one, the one that is always warm, And this new addition, still cold, still waiting. The toast had 3 slices today. The coffee filled 3 cups, and in the steam rising from the nearest one, I thought I saw a shape form and dissolve, something like a face but not quite, something that smiled without lips and watched without eyes. I picked up my fork. I began to eat. Behind me, I heard the floor creak. 2 separate points of weight settling into the wood, 2 presences lowering themselves into the chairs I could not bring myself to turn and see. The coffee was perfect. It was always perfect. And somewhere in the back of my mind, in the small, dark room where the last of my sanity huddled in the corner, I wondered if I had ever truly lived alone at all, or if I had simply been blind to the company I had always kept, the mouths that fed alongside me, the eyes that watched me sleep, waiting, patient, for the moment when I would finally be ready to see. I finished my toast, I drained my cup, and I sat very still, feeling the warmth of the chairs behind me, listening to the soft, wet sounds of something chewing, and I smiled. The loneliness, at least, was finally gone. Story 11. The first drawing appeared on a Tuesday. I remember this detail with uncomfortable precision because Tuesdays were when I vacuumed the upstairs hallway, a ritual my wife had instituted years ago, and which I maintained with the mechanical devotion of a man who had learned that domestic peace required small, consistent surrenders. The carpet in that hallway was the color of dried blood, a burgundy that had seemed sophisticated in the showroom, but now, 15 years later, only reminded me of something old and clotted. It was while running the vacuum along the baseboard that I noticed the corner lifting, curling upward like a lip pulled back from teeth. Beneath it, folded twice, was a piece of paper. The drawing was crude, rendered in waxy crayon with the unsteady lines of an unpracticed hand. It depicted a bed, our bed, I realized, with a slow spreading coldness, recognizable by the brass headboard my wife had inherited from her grandmother, and in it, a figure sleeping. The figure was clearly meant to be a man. He lay on his side, facing left, one arm tucked beneath the pillow. The blanket was blue. Our blanket was blue. Standing beside the bed was another figure, drawn entirely in black crayon pressed so hard that the paper had torn slightly in places. It had no features, no face, no hands, no discernible clothing. Just a shape, roughly humanoid, watching. I stood in the hallway for a long time, holding that paper, listening to the house settle around me. The afternoon light came through the window at the end of the corridor in a long, dust-filled beam, and somewhere downstairs, the refrigerator hummed its low, endless song. Everything was normal. Everything was exactly as it should be. I threw the drawing away. The second appeared 7 days later. Same place, same corner of the carpet, which I had pressed flat and secured with carpet tape the previous Wednesday. The tape was undisturbed, the carpet firmly in place, and yet, there it was. Another sheet of paper, same waxy crayon, same crude hand. The scene was identical. The man in the bed, the brass headboard, the blue blanket. But the black figure had moved. It stood closer now, at the very edge of the mattress. One arm, if it could be called an arm, extended toward the sleeping form. That night, I did not sleep well. I lay in bed beside my wife, listening to her breathe, staring at the ceiling where shadows pooled in the corners like dark water. The room felt different somehow, smaller. The air seemed thicker, harder to pull into my lungs. Several times I caught myself holding my breath, straining to hear something beneath the ordinary sounds of the house. The creak of settling wood, the distant murmur of traffic, the soft tick of the clock on the dresser. There was nothing. Of course there was nothing. But I could not shake the sensation that I was being watched. I did not tell my wife about the drawings. This was not, I told myself, because I was hiding anything. It was simply that there was nothing to tell. Papers appearing beneath a carpet in an old house. It meant nothing. Previous owners, perhaps, or some forgotten renovation that had trapped debris beneath the flooring. The fact that the drawings seemed to depict our bedroom, Our bed, me. This was coincidence. Pareidolia. The human mind's desperate need to find patterns, even where none existed. But I began checking the carpet every day. Monday. Nothing. Tuesday. Nothing. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Nothing. And then on Saturday, another drawing. The black figure was sitting on the bed now, not touching the sleeping man, not yet, but close. So close. Its featureless head was tilted at an angle that suggested attention, focus, hunger. The crayon had been pressed even harder this time. The paper was waxy and soft where the black had been applied, layer upon layer, building something dense and impenetrable. I began having trouble sleeping. It was not insomnia, exactly. I could fall asleep easily enough. My body was tired, and the familiar weight of the blankets, the warmth of my wife beside me, usually pulled me under within minutes. But I would wake in the small hours of the morning, 2, 3, sometimes 4 a.m., with my heart racing and a certainty, absolute and irrational, that I was not alone. I would lie perfectly still, barely breathing, and scan the darkness. The bedroom at night was a geography of shadows. The dresser, a darker mass against the far wall, the curtains, shifting slightly in some unfelt draft, the doorway to the hall, a rectangle of deeper black. Nothing moved. Nothing was ever there. And yet, there was a smell sometimes. Something I couldn't quite identify. Not unpleasant exactly, but wrong. Like cold stone, or the air in a basement that had been sealed too long. It came and went so quickly that I was never certain I had smelled it at all. My wife noticed the change in me. She asked, one evening over dinner, if something was bothering me. I looked tired, she said, distracted. Was work stressful? Was there something I wanted to talk about? I told her I was fine, just not sleeping well. The usual middle-aged complaints. She nodded and let it go, but I caught her watching me sometimes after that, a small furrow between her brows that spoke of concern she was too polite to press. I should have told her. I know that now, but how could I? What would I have said? That I was finding drawings beneath our carpet? That they seemed to show something watching me while I slept? She would have thought I was losing my mind. Perhaps I was. The drawings continued to appear. Every week, without fail, in that same spot beneath the lifting carpet. I stopped securing it with tape. It seemed pointless. Whatever was placing them there was not deterred by such mundane obstacles. I began to wonder if they were even being placed at all, or if they were simply appearing, manifesting, growing from the floorboards like a fungus. The scene evolved with each iteration. The black figure moved closer, then closer still. It sat on the bed. It leaned over the sleeping man. In one drawing, its arm, that shapeless appendage of pure black, rested on the pillow, inches from the man's face. In another, it had positioned itself directly behind him, curled around his sleeping form like a second shadow. I started photographing the drawings before I threw them away. I'm not sure why. Evidence, perhaps. Though evidence of what? I would scroll through the images on my phone late at night, studying them, looking for details I might have missed. The brass headboard, the blue blanket, the man, always sleeping, always unaware, the black figure, always watching. The smell grew stronger. It was there when I woke now, every morning. That cold mineral scent, like a cave or a tomb. My wife never mentioned it. When I asked her casually if she had noticed any strange odors, she looked at me blankly and said the house smelled fine, like always. But I could smell it. In the bedroom, in the hallway, clinging to my clothes and my hair. I started showering twice a day, scrubbing my skin until it was raw, but the smell persisted. It was inside me now, part of me. And the watching, the constant oppressive sensation of being observed, had intensified to the point where I could barely function. At work, I found myself glancing over my shoulder, certain that someone stood just behind me, just out of sight. At home, I kept the lights on until the last possible moment, dreading the darkness that pooled in corners and doorways. Even in the brightest part of the day, with sunlight streaming through the windows and the ordinary sounds of life all around me, I felt eyes on me, watching, waiting. The space between my shoulder blades began to ache with the constant tension of anticipation. The night before the last drawing, I woke at 3:17 a.m. The room was dark, the house was silent. My wife slept beside me, her breathing slow and steady, her face peaceful in the faint light that crept around the edges of the curtains. Everything was normal, everything was exactly as it should be, but the air was cold, so cold, and the smell, that smell, was overwhelming, filling my nostrils and coating my tongue, thick and cloying and impossibly present. I did not move. I could not move. My body had locked into a rigid stillness, every muscle frozen, every nerve screaming. Something was wrong. Something was terribly, desperately wrong. I could feel it in the weight of the darkness, in the quality of the silence, in the way the shadows seemed to press against me like something solid. And then, a sound, soft, barely audible, like fabric sliding against fabric or skin brushing against sheets. It came from beside me, not from my wife's side, from mine. I lay there paralyzed, staring at the ceiling, not daring to turn my head, not daring to look at what might be standing, or sitting, or lying in the darkness next to me. The sound came again, closer now, and with it a pressure, a weight, a sense of presence that was as undeniable as it was impossible. Something was in the bed with me. I squeezed my eyes shut. I stopped breathing. I willed myself to be asleep, to be dreaming, to be anywhere but in that room, in that bed, in that moment. The pressure intensified, the cold deepened. The smell wrapped around me like a shroud. And then, as suddenly as it had come, it was gone. The room was warm. The air was clear. The silence was ordinary, broken only by my wife's gentle breathing and the distant tick of the clock. I did not sleep again that night. I found the last drawing this morning, same place, same corner, same crude, waxy crayon lines. But the scene had changed. The man was still in bed. The brass headboard was still visible, the blue blanket still pulled up to his shoulders. But he was no longer alone. The black figure was in the bed with him. It lay pressed against his back, one arm draped over his body, its featureless head resting on the pillow beside his. They looked almost peaceful, almost intimate, like lovers, or like something pretending to be. I stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at that drawing, feeling the air around me grow cold. The smell was back, stronger than ever, and beneath it, beneath the cold stone and the sealed basement and the wrongness, I detected something new, something almost familiar. It smelled like me. That was this morning. It is evening now, and I'm sitting in the living room, watching the light fade from the windows, listening to my wife move around the kitchen as she prepares dinner. Everything is normal. Everything is exactly as it should be. But I can feel it. Behind me, beside me, within me. The watching has not stopped. It has settled in, made itself at home, become as much a part of me as my own heartbeat. I no longer know if something is following me, or if I am following it. I no longer know if the drawings are warnings or invitations, prophecies or memories. I have checked the hallway carpet 3 times since dinner. Nothing yet. But I know there will be another drawing. There is always another drawing. And I find myself wondering, dreading, hoping what it will show. Whether the scene will change, whether the man in the bed will finally wake up and see what has been lying beside him all along, or whether he will simply continue to sleep, night after night, while something dark and shapeless presses closer, and closer, and closer still. The bedroom door is open. The hallway beyond is dark. Tonight, I think I will not turn off the lights. Tonight, I will not close my eyes. Tonight, I will sit here in this chair and wait for morning, and I will not go to sleep. But I am so tired, and the bed looks so warm. And somewhere beneath the carpet, I am almost certain, I can hear the soft, deliberate sound of crayon on paper. Story 12. The first time it happened, I convinced myself I had been dreaming. 4 a.m, that particular hour, when the darkness feels thickest, when the house settles into its deepest silence. I woke to the sound of piano keys, soft, deliberate, unmistakable. The melody drifted up through the floorboards like smoke, curling into my bedroom with an intimacy that made my skin prickle. I knew that song. I had known it my entire life. My father used to play it for me when I was young, his fingers moving across the keys with the kind of muscle memory that comes from decades of repetition. A nocturne. His nocturne, he called it, though I suspect he had learned it from someone else long before I was born. I lay there in the dark, my wife breathing steadily beside me, and I listened until the final notes faded into nothing. Then I closed my eyes and told myself it was grief. Grief does strange things to the mind. It had only been 3 weeks since the funeral. The second night, I got out of bed. The stairs creaked beneath my weight as I descended, each step bringing me closer to the living room where the piano sat against the far wall. My father had left it to me in his will, the only thing of real value he owned, a 1962 upright with yellowed keys and a crack running through the soundboard that gave every note a slightly hollow quality. I had not touched it since bringing it into my home. I could not bring myself to lift the lid. The music stopped the moment my foot touched the bottom step. I stood in the doorway for a long time, staring at the instrument. Moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting pale rectangles across the hardwood floor. The piano looked exactly as it always did, silent, still, ordinary. The lid was closed. The bench was pushed in. Nothing moved except the dust motes suspended in the silver light. That night, I did not sleep. By the end of the first week, I had established the pattern. Always 4 a.m., always the same nocturne, always stopping the instant I drew near, as if whatever played those keys could sense my approach. My wife never heard it. She slept through every occurrence, her rest deep and undisturbed. And when I mentioned it over breakfast, she looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. Concern, perhaps. Or something else. She suggested I was still processing the loss. She reminded me that I had been close to my father, that his death had been sudden, that these things take time. I nodded and said nothing about the way the melody lingered in my ears long after it stopped, or how I had begun to recognize variations in the playing, subtle differences in tempo and dynamics that suggested a living presence behind the keys. 2 weeks in, I decided to test my theory. I waited in the living room that night, sitting in the armchair across from the piano, watching the clock on the wall tick toward 4. The house was utterly silent. I could hear my own heartbeat, feel the pulse in my temples. At 3:58, I noticed my hands were trembling. At 3:59, I thought I detected a faint vibration in the air, a pressure change so subtle it might have been imagined. At 4 o'clock exactly, the first note sounded. I did not move. I barely breathed. The lid remained closed. I could see it clearly in the darkness. Closed, latched, motionless. But the music continued, each note emerging from within the sealed instrument with perfect clarity. I watched as the song progressed through its familiar movements, the melody rising and falling in patterns I had memorized as a boy. The keys were not moving. Nothing was moving. And yet the sound filled the room with an almost physical presence, pressing against my eardrums, resonating in my chest. When it finished, the silence that followed was so complete I thought I might have gone deaf. I sat there until dawn, watching the piano, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. The next day I bought a padlock. It was a heavy thing, industrial-grade steel, the kind used to secure storage units and warehouse doors. I fastened it through the latch that held the lid closed, testing it several times to make sure it was secure. My wife watched me from the kitchen doorway, drying her hands on a towel, saying nothing. The way she looked at me made something tighten in my stomach, a kind of wariness that had not been there before. I told her it was just a precaution. I told her I wanted to make sure no one could tamper with it. She asked me who would tamper with a piano in our own home, and I did not have an answer. That night, the music came again. I lay in bed and listened to every note, my body rigid beneath the sheets, my eyes fixed on the ceiling. The padlock had not stopped it. The closed lid had not stopped it. The music played on, indifferent to physical barriers, as if the instrument itself had become merely incidental, a vessel for something that no longer needed it. By the end of the third week, I had stopped sleeping entirely. My wife noticed the dark circles forming beneath my eyes, the way my hands shook when I poured my morning coffee, the increasing difficulty I had following simple conversations. She suggested I see someone, a professional, someone who could help me work through whatever was happening. I agreed because I wanted to reassure her, but I knew no therapist could explain what I was experiencing. This was not grief. This was not stress. This was something else. Something that had followed my father's piano into our home and had no intention of leaving. The music began spreading. At first, I thought I was imagining it. A faint echo of the nocturne in the bathroom while I showered. A ghost of the melody in the basement when I went to check the furnace. Brief snatches of notes that vanished the moment I focused on them, leaving me unsure whether I had heard anything at all. But then it grew stronger, more insistent. I would be standing in the kitchen and hear the melody coming from behind the refrigerator. I would be lying in bed and detect it seeping through the wall beside my head, soft but unmistakable, playing in some space that existed between the plaster and the exterior brick. My wife could not hear it. I asked her directly, multiple times, describing exactly what I was hearing and when. She looked at me with growing alarm and shook her head. She heard nothing. The house was silent to her, as silent as it had always been. She started sleeping in the guest room. She said it was because my restlessness was disturbing her, but I knew the truth. She was afraid of me. She was afraid of what I was becoming. I began documenting everything. I kept a notebook by my bed, recording the exact times the music started and stopped, noting any variations in the melody, describing the location from which it seemed to originate. I bought a digital audio recorder and left it running throughout the night, hoping to capture evidence that I was not losing my mind. Every morning, I reviewed the recordings. Every morning, they contained nothing but white noise and the occasional creak of the house settling. Whatever I was hearing existed outside the range of mechanical detection. Or perhaps it existed only inside my head. That possibility haunted me more than any supernatural explanation. I found myself standing in front of mirrors, studying my reflection, searching for signs of deterioration I might have missed. I looked tired, certainly. Older than I remembered. But there was something else in my eyes now, a quality I could not name, a kind of hollow awareness that seemed to peer back at me from some great distance. I began to wonder if I had ever truly known myself, or if the person I had been was simply a mask that was now beginning to crack. My father had never spoken of anything like this. He had owned that piano for 40 years, played it nearly every day, and not once mentioned hearing music when his fingers were not on the keys. But then again, my father had been a private man. He kept his fears to himself, his doubts, his midnight terrors. Perhaps he had heard it too. Perhaps he had lived with it for decades, this presence that lived inside the instrument and simply chose not to speak of it. Perhaps that was why he left the piano to me, not as a gift, but as a burden he could no longer carry. I began to notice other things, small details that seemed wrong in ways I could not articulate. The shadows in the living room fell at angles that did not match the position of the lamps. The temperature dropped by several degrees whenever I entered the room where the piano sat, cold enough that I could see my breath hanging in the air. The walls themselves seemed to have developed a faint vibration, a hum so low it was more felt than heard, pulsing in rhythm with something that was not my heartbeat. And then there was the sensation of being watched. It started as a prickling at the back of my neck, a vague awareness of attention that I could never quite locate. But it grew stronger with each passing day, until I could feel eyes on me constantly, in the shower, in the kitchen, in my bed at night. I would spin around suddenly, certain I would catch someone standing behind me, but there was never anyone there. Just empty rooms and long shadows and the faint, ever-present suggestion of music drifting from somewhere within the walls. My wife asked me to see a doctor. She used words like exhaustion and stress and grief-induced psychosis, clinical terms that sounded reasonable and reassuring. I agreed to make an appointment. I agreed because I wanted her to stop looking at me with that mixture of fear and pity, because I wanted to believe there was a simple explanation for everything I was experiencing. The doctor listened to my symptoms and ordered tests. Blood work, brain scans, psychological evaluations. Everything came back normal. I was, according to every measurable metric, a perfectly healthy man in his early 40s. The doctor suggested sleep medication. He suggested therapy. He suggested that sometimes the mind creates experiences that feel absolutely real, but have no basis in external reality. I thanked him and went home and sat in the living room with the piano. It was afternoon. Sunlight streamed through the windows, warm and golden, illuminating the dust motes that swirled through the air. The piano sat against the wall, unchanged, unremarkable. The padlock still hung from the closed lid. I stared at it for a long time, trying to reconcile what I knew with what I experienced, trying to find some middle ground between madness and truth. And then I noticed something I had never seen before. The wood grain on the piano's surface had changed. It was subtle, so subtle that anyone else would have dismissed it as a trick of the light. But I had looked at that piano every day for weeks. I knew every scratch, every imperfection, every whirl and line in the aged mahogany. And now there were patterns in the grain that had not been there before, shapes that almost resolved into something recognizable before dissolving back into randomness. I leaned closer, squinting, and for just a moment I thought I saw a face looking back at me. My father's face, his features distorted by the natural variations of the wood, his mouth open as if caught mid-song. I blinked, and it was gone. That night, I did not wait until 4. I went downstairs at midnight and sat in the armchair and watched. The house was silent. The piano was still. Hours passed and nothing happened, and I began to feel foolish, a grown man sitting in the dark, waiting for ghosts that existed only in his deteriorating mind. Then the walls began to breathe. It started as a subtle expansion, so gradual I almost missed it. The plaster bulged outward by perhaps half an inch, then contracted, bulged again, contracted again. A rhythm, a pulse. The music followed a moment later, not from the piano, but from everywhere at once. The ceiling, the floor, the very air itself humming with the nocturne's familiar melody. I sat frozen as the sound wrapped around me, as the walls continued their impossible respiration, as the temperature plummeted until I could no longer feel my fingers or toes. I understood then that whatever this was, it had never been contained by the piano. The piano was simply where it had chosen to live while my father was alive. Now that he was gone, it needed somewhere else to reside. It had found the walls. It had found the foundation. It had found every beam and joist and nail that held this house together, and it was settling in, making itself comfortable, preparing for a long stay. I am writing this in the morning light, though even now I can hear it. A faint whisper of melody just at the edge of perception, threading through the silence like smoke through still air. My wife has gone to stay with her sister. She says she will come back when I am better, but we both know she is lying. I am alone in this house with whatever lives inside its walls, and I am beginning to suspect that I will never be anything else. The music plays constantly now, soft but persistent, a companion I did not choose but cannot escape. And sometimes late at night, I find myself humming along. Story 13. The scratching started 3 days after we buried him. At first, I convinced myself it was the house settling, old bones creaking in sympathy with my own grief. But houses don't settle in rhythmic patterns. Houses don't pause at the bedroom door. Houses don't wait. My wife heard it too, that first week. She would look at me across the dinner table, her fork frozen midway to her mouth, and I would see my own question reflected in her eyes. Neither of us spoke about it. Speaking would have made it real, and we weren't ready for real. We were still learning how to exist in a home that had become too quiet, too still, too empty of the particular warmth that had filled it for 11 years. The bed felt wrong without the familiar weight at our feet. I kept waking at 3 in the morning, reaching down to touch fur that wasn't there, my hand finding only cold sheets where a warm body should have been. My wife started sleeping with her back to my side of the bed, curled tight like she was trying to make herself smaller, trying to take up less space in a room that suddenly had too much of it. I told myself the grief was normal. The veterinarian had warned us about this, the phantom sounds, the empty spaces that seemed to breathe with absence. She had handed us a pamphlet about pet loss, her voice soft with practiced sympathy, and I had shoved it in my coat pocket without reading it. Some things you don't need a pamphlet to understand. But the pamphlet hadn't mentioned the smell. It started 2 weeks after the burial, a faint, damp odor that seemed to cling to the corners of the house. Not decay, not exactly. More like wet earth after rain, like something that had been underground and was now somewhere else. I checked the basement for leaks. I crawled under the porch with a flashlight, looking for standing water. I found nothing but dry concrete and dust and the hollow echo of my own breathing. My wife noticed it too. She didn't say anything, but I watched her move through the house with her hand pressed to her nose, her eyes searching the shadows like she expected to find something crouching there. She started burning candles, vanilla, lavender, anything to mask that persistent earthen smell. The flames flickered even when all the windows were closed, even when the air should have been still. I began sleeping poorly. Not insomnia exactly, but something worse. A kind of half-sleep where I was aware of the darkness around me, aware of every small sound, every shift in the air. The house seemed to breathe at night, a slow inhale and exhale that matched the rhythm of my own lungs. I would lie there with my eyes open, staring at the ceiling, and sometimes I thought I saw shadows moving at the edge of my vision. When I turned to look, there was nothing. There was always nothing. The scratching grew louder. It wasn't my imagination. I tested this by recording the sounds on my phone, playing them back in the harsh light of morning. The audio was unmistakable. The click, click, click of nails on hardwood, moving down the hallway, pausing at our bedroom door. The recording ended with a sound that might have been breathing, might have been static, might have been nothing at all. I deleted it and didn't record again. Some evidence is worse than doubt. My wife and I stopped talking about it. We stopped talking about most things. She would come home from work and go directly to the guest room, where she had started sleeping 3 weeks after the burial. She said it was because I was restless, because my tossing kept her awake. But I saw how she looked at the bedroom door before she passed it. I saw how she hurried, her footsteps quick and deliberate, like she was trying not to disturb something. I started working from home. My colleagues asked if I was feeling all right, and I told them I had a cold, a persistent cough, something minor. I didn't tell them that I couldn't bear the thought of leaving the house empty. I didn't tell them that I had started to feel watched whenever I stepped outside, like something was waiting at the window, pressing its nose to the glass, leaving circles of fog that faded before I could get back inside to see them. The fog circles were real. I found them one morning on the living room window, 2 perfect ovals at exactly the height where a nose would have pressed against the glass if something had been standing on the porch. Standing on its hind legs, waiting. I cleaned the glass with trembling hands. By the time I was finished, my wife had already left for work without saying goodbye. The turning point came on a Thursday. I was working at my desk in the corner of the living room, answering emails I couldn't remember reading, when I felt something brush against my leg. Not a draft, something solid, something with texture. Fur. I jerked back so hard I knocked over my coffee, the dark liquid spreading across my papers like a stain, like soil, like wet earth. When I looked down, there was nothing there. But on my pants, just above my ankle, there was a smear of mud. Fresh mud, still damp, pressed into the fabric in a pattern that looked almost like a paw print. I didn't tell my wife. What would I have said? That our dog had touched me? That something had touched me? She would have looked at me with those careful eyes, the ones she had been using for weeks now. the ones that measured and weighed and found me wanting. She would have suggested I see someone, a professional, someone who could explain away the scratching and the smell and the wet earth on my clothes. I didn't want an explanation. I wanted to understand. I started watching the backyard. I would sit in the kitchen after dark, all the lights off, staring out at the place where we had buried him. A small mound under the oak tree, marked with a stone I had found by the river. The grave looked undisturbed. The earth was settled, the grass beginning to grow over it in thin, pale shoots. But sometimes, when the moon was bright enough, I thought I saw movement near the tree, a shape that was there and then wasn't, a shadow that moved against the wind. My wife caught me one night, standing at the kitchen window at 2 a.m. She asked what I was doing, her voice thick with sleep and something else, fear maybe, or exhaustion, or both. I told her I couldn't sleep. She stood behind me for a long moment, and I felt her looking past me, looking at the yard, at the tree, at the grave. She didn't ask what I was watching for. She already knew. She went back to the guest room without another word. I heard her lock the door. The next morning, I found fur on my pillow. Not much, just a few strands, coarse and gray, exactly the color his coat had been toward the end. They were damp, not with water, but with something thicker, something that left a residue on my fingers when I touched them. I brought them to my nose without thinking, and the smell hit me like a physical force. Earth, and something older. Something that had been buried and was now unburied. Something that had been dead and was now something else. I threw the fur away. Then I retrieved it from the trash and put it in a plastic bag which I hid in my desk drawer. I don't know why. Maybe I needed proof. Maybe I needed to know I wasn't imagining things. Or maybe I was already past the point where proof mattered, already so deep in the territory of the impossible that evidence had become irrelevant. The scratching that night was different. It didn't stop at the bedroom door. It came inside. I lay in bed with my eyes closed, my body rigid under the blankets, and I listened to the sound of nails on the hardwood floor moving around my bed. Click, click, click. A pause. Click, click, click. Another pause. The sound circled me once, twice, 3 times, and then there was silence. The kind of silence that has weight, that has presence, that presses against your eardrums like water. I felt the mattress dip. It was subtle at first, just a slight shift in the balance of the bed, like something small had climbed onto the corner. Then the weight moved, traveled up along my legs, settled into the familiar spot near my feet where he had always slept. I could feel the warmth of it through the blankets. I could feel the rhythmic rise and fall of breathing that wasn't my own. I opened my eyes. There was nothing there. The end of the bed was empty, the blankets flat and undisturbed. But the weight remained. The warmth remained. And when I reached down with a shaking hand, my fingers brushed against something that felt like fur, wet, cold, matted with what might have been dirt or might have been something else entirely. I didn't scream. I wanted to, but my throat had closed up, my voice trapped somewhere deep in my chest where the fear lived. I lay there for what felt like hours, feeling that impossible weight at my feet, feeling the brush of something against my ankles every time I shifted, feeling watched by eyes I couldn't see. When morning came, I found more fur on the sheets. There was mud on the blankets, a trail of it leading from the foot of the bed to the door. The trail ended at the threshold, as if whatever had made it had simply stopped existing at that point, or had stopped being visible. I didn't clean it up. I left the bedroom and closed the door behind me, and I haven't slept in there since. My wife moved out last week. She didn't give me a reason, but she didn't need to. I saw how she looked at me in those final days, like I was something dangerous, something unpredictable, something she needed to get away from. She packed her things while I sat in the kitchen, watching the backyard, watching the grave. She paused at the front door before she left, and for a moment I thought she was going to say something. An explanation, an apology, a goodbye. But she just shook her head and walked out, and I listened to her car start and pull away and disappear down the street. The house is quiet now, or it should be. But every night I hear the scratching. Every night I feel the weight on the bed. Every night I wake to find more evidence. Fur on my clothes, mud on the floors, wet paw prints leading from the back door to my bedroom that dry and disappear by morning. The smell has gotten stronger. That damp earth odor that clings to everything. That has seeped into my clothes and my skin and my dreams. I went to the backyard yesterday. I stood at the foot of the grave and I looked at the stone and I told myself that what was buried there was still buried. That earth and time and the simple mechanics of death had done their work. I told myself this, but I didn't believe it. The ground looked different, darker somehow, and there were marks in the soil that might have been from rain, might have been from animals, might have been from something pushing up from below. I didn't dig. I couldn't. I was afraid of what I would find, afraid of finding nothing, which would mean I had lost my mind, and afraid of finding something, which would mean something far worse. Tonight, I am sitting in the living room with all the lights on. I can hear the scratching in the hallway. I can smell the earth, thick and close, like the walls themselves are made of soil. There is a shape at the edge of my vision, something that moves when I'm not looking directly at it, something that waits and watches with patient, terrible devotion. I think he missed me. I think he came back because he missed me, because 11 years of love don't just end, because some bonds are stronger than dirt and time and the boundary between living and not living. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's nothing in the hallway. Maybe the scratching is just the house settling, just my grief playing tricks on my exhausted mind. Maybe the fur and the mud and the weight on the bed are just the symptoms of a breakdown I can't admit I'm having. But then, if that's true, why do I hear breathing outside my door right now? Why is the smell getting stronger? And why, when I look down at my hands, do I see dirt under my fingernails? Dirt I don't remember touching. Dirt that looks exactly like the soil from the grave beneath the oak tree. The scratching has stopped. Something is waiting for me to open the door. And part of me, the part that still remembers the warmth of his body against my legs, the softness of his ears, the way he would look at me like I was the whole world, that part of me wants to let it in. That part of me wants to see what came back. Story 14. The mirror in the hallway has always hung at a slight angle. I noticed it the day we moved in, 3 years ago now, but never bothered to straighten it. My wife called it charming, a quirk of an old house settling into its bones. I called it laziness, and moved on to unpacking boxes. Now I wish I had taken it down, smashed it, burned the frame and scattered the ashes somewhere far from here. It started 11 days ago. I remember because it was a Tuesday, and I had come home early from work with a headache that pulsed behind my left eye like something trying to claw its way out. The house was empty. My wife wouldn't return for another 2 hours, and the silence felt thick, almost textured, pressing against my eardrums. I walked past the hallway mirror without thinking, the way you walk past furniture you've stopped seeing, and something caught the corner of my vision. I stopped, turned back. The reflection showed our hallway. Same cream-colored walls, same wooden floor, same armchair we'd placed beneath the mirror because my wife insisted every entryway needed somewhere to sit and remove your shoes. But the walls in the reflection were wrong. The cream had yellowed, darkened in patches like old newspaper left in sunlight. The wood floor showed gaps between planks that didn't exist in reality, and the armchair, the burgundy velvet armchair my wife had found at an estate sale, was faded to a sickly brown, its fabric torn in places, stuffing visible like exposed muscle. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. The headache throbbed. When I looked again, the reflection was normal. Our hallway, pristine and familiar. I laughed, a short, unconvincing sound, and blamed the migraine, the stress, the fluorescent lights at the office that had been flickering for weeks. I took 2 pills, lay down on the couch, and fell into a dreamless sleep. The next morning, I almost convinced myself it hadn't happened. Almost. But I found myself pausing at the mirror before leaving for work. Just for a moment. Just to check. The reflection behaved as reflections should, copying my movements with mechanical precision. I raised my hand. The reflection raised its hand. I leaned closer. It leaned closer. Normal. Ordinary. I was being ridiculous. That evening I saw the figure. My wife was in the kitchen, the sound of running water and clinking dishes drifting through the house. I walked past the mirror, and there it was again. The deteriorated hallway, walls stained, floor warped. But this time, the armchair wasn't empty. Someone sat there, a shape, human-sized, facing away from me. I could see the curve of shoulders, the suggestion of a head, but no details. Just a silhouette pressed into the ruined chair like a stain. I didn't move, couldn't move. My breath caught somewhere between my lungs and throat, trapped. Then my wife called my name from the kitchen, asking if I wanted tea, and the spell broke. I looked at our armchair, the real one, the solid one, and it was empty. But when I pressed my palm against the velvet cushion, I felt warmth, body warmth, as if someone had just stood up. I didn't mention it to my wife. What would I say? The mirror is showing me things. There's a person in the reflection who isn't here. She would worry. She already worried too much about my long hours, my insomnia, the way I'd been grinding my teeth in my sleep. I didn't need to add hallucinations to her list of concerns, but I couldn't stop watching the mirror. Over the following days, I developed routines. I would walk past slowly, letting my gaze drift toward the glass as if by accident. Most times the reflection was normal, but sometimes, always when I was alone, always when the house was quiet, the other hallway appeared, the decayed version, the wrong version. And gradually, I began to notice more details. The wallpaper in the reflection was peeling at the corners. A water stain spread across the ceiling that didn't exist in my hallway. The light fixture, a simple brass pendant my wife had chosen, hung crooked in the reflection, its glass shade cracked and dark. And the figure in the chair appeared more frequently, always sitting, always facing away, never moving. I started taking notes, times, dates, conditions. I bought a small notebook and kept it in my jacket pocket, scribbling observations like a man documenting his own descent. Occurrence at 7:43 p.m., house empty, overcast outside. Figure present, appears to be wearing dark clothing. Reflection showed additional deterioration. Crack in mirror frame visible only in reflected version. That last detail disturbed me more than the figure. The crack wasn't in my mirror. I checked. I ran my fingers along the frame, pressed my face close enough to fog the glass with my breath. The frame was intact, smooth, unmarked. But in the reflection, a thin fracture ran diagonally across the wood like a scar. My wife noticed something was wrong by the end of the first week. She found me standing in the hallway at 2 a.m, staring at the mirror in darkness. She asked what I was doing, her voice thick with sleep and concern. I told her I thought I'd heard a noise. She accepted this, but I saw the way she looked at me the next morning over breakfast. The careful way she asked about work, about stress, about whether I'd considered talking to someone. I assured her I was fine. The word tasted like copper in my mouth. The dream started on day 8. Not nightmares exactly. Nothing chased me. Nothing threatened. But I would find myself standing in a hallway that looked like mine, but wasn't. The walls pressed closer. The floor felt soft, unstable, like walking on rotting wood. And at the end of the hall, where our mirror hung, there was only a dark rectangle, a doorway, an opening into somewhere I couldn't see but could feel watching me. I woke from these dreams with my heart racing and my sheets damp with sweat. My wife slept beside me undisturbed, her breathing slow and even. I envied her. I envied anyone who could close their eyes without seeing that hallway. On day 9, I made a decision. I would prove to myself that nothing was wrong. I set up my phone to record the mirror, propped it on a shelf across from the glass, and left for work. 8 hours of footage. If something appeared, I would see it. If nothing appeared, I could finally dismiss this as stress, as exhaustion, as whatever mundane explanation my rational mind kept offering and my gut kept rejecting. That evening, I reviewed the footage. Fast-forwarded through hours of empty hallway, static and boring. Nothing. No deterioration. No figure. Just a mirror reflecting exactly what it should reflect. Relief washed over me, warm and sweet. I laughed, really laughed this time, and deleted the video. I was fine. Everything was fine. Then I walked past the mirror to get dinner, and the figure was there, sitting in the ruined chair. But this time, it had turned. Not fully, just slightly. Enough that I could see the edge of a profile, the suggestion of a face, and for one terrible, frozen moment, I thought I recognized the shape of the jaw, the angle of the nose, the way the shoulders hunched forward. It looked like me. I stumbled backward, hit the opposite wall, and when I looked again, the reflection was normal. Just me, pale and wide-eyed, staring at my own terrified face. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with every light on, listening to the house settle and creak, jumping at shadows. My wife found me there in the morning, and this time I couldn't lie. I told her everything. The mirror, the decay, the figure. She listened without interrupting, her expression cycling through confusion, concern, and something that might have been fear. Though whether she feared for me or of me, I couldn't tell. She suggested I see a doctor. She used words like stress and overwork, and maybe something to help you sleep. She didn't say crazy, but I heard it anyway, hovering beneath her careful tone. I agreed to make an appointment, anything to ease the worry in her eyes. But that afternoon, while she was out, I did something I shouldn't have. I stood before the mirror with a marker in my hand and drew a small X on the glass. Bottom right corner, barely visible. Then I waited. Within an hour, the other hallway appeared. Decayed. Wrong. And there, in the bottom right corner of the reflected mirror, was an X. But it wasn't where I'd drawn it. It was reversed, yes, as reflection should be, but it was also smudged, faded, as if it had been there for years, as if I had drawn it long ago and forgotten. I checked my mirror. My X was fresh, sharp, black. The reflected X was old, weathered, a relic. My hands began to shake. That was 2 days ago. Since then, I've noticed other things. Small things, wrong things. A coffee cup on the kitchen counter that I don't remember using. A book on the nightstand open to a page I've never read. Scratches on the hardwood floor that appear overnight. Thin parallel lines like something being dragged. My wife says she didn't notice. Says maybe they were always there, but her voice wavers when she says it. And the mirror. The mirror keeps showing me that hallway, that chair, that figure. Except now the figure stands sometimes. It paces. It approaches the glass from the other side and stands there, facing me. Its features still obscured by shadow, but its posture unmistakable. It's waiting. Yesterday I found something that made my stomach turn to ice. I was cleaning out my desk drawer, desperate for distraction, for normalcy, when I discovered a notebook I didn't recognize. Old, water-stained, the pages brittle and yellow. I opened it, and my own handwriting stared back at me. My handwriting, but shakier, older. The entries were dated. They described a mirror, a hallway, a figure. They described everything I'd been experiencing, but the dates were wrong, years wrong. The final entry, scrawled in letters barely legible, read, "He's almost through. He's almost me." I don't remember writing it. I don't remember any of it. Tonight, my wife is visiting her sister. She asked if I would be okay alone, and I lied and said yes. The house is quiet now. The hallway is dark. I'm sitting in the living room writing this, and I can feel the mirror's presence like a cold spot in the air. I haven't looked at it since she left. I'm afraid of what I'll see. I'm afraid it won't be a reflection anymore. I'm afraid it will be a door. A few minutes ago, I heard something from the hallway. A soft sound like fabric shifting, like someone settling into an old chair. I told myself it was the house. Pipes, wind, all the comfortable lies we tell ourselves to keep the dark at bay. But my armchair is in the hallway, the burgundy one. the one from the reflection. And just now, as I sit here with my pen trembling against the page, I felt something I cannot explain, a warmth spreading through my limbs, a heaviness in my bones, a strange sense of distance, as if I'm watching myself from somewhere far away. I'm going to check the mirror. I have to. I have to know which side of the glass I'm on. The hallway is 20 steps from where I sit. The mirror hangs at a slight angle, the way it always has. The armchair waits beneath it, empty or occupied. I don't know yet. I'm standing now, walking. 15 steps, 10. The air grows colder with each step, thick and heavy with something that smells like dust and age and forgotten rooms. 5 steps. I can see the mirror's edge now, the brass frame catching the dim light from the living room behind me. My reflection should appear any moment. My reflection or something else. Someone else. I stop in front of the glass, and I see the hallway. My hallway. Pristine walls, polished floor, the armchair beneath me, burgundy and whole. But I'm not in the reflection. The chair in the mirror is empty. The hallway in the mirror is empty. And standing where I should be, here, on this side, in the real and solid world, I feel a warmth beneath my palms that isn't mine. I look down. I'm sitting in the armchair. I don't remember sitting. From somewhere far away, I hear a door open. Footsteps. My wife's voice calling my name, asking why all the lights are off, asking if I'm okay. I want to answer. I try to answer, but my mouth won't move. My body won't move. And in the mirror, in the perfect and unblemished reflection of our hallway, I see a figure standing where I should be. It raises its hand slowly, deliberately, and waves. I watch my arm rise. I watch my hand wave back. Story 15. The first time it happened, I told myself it was nothing. Dogs bark. That's what they do. They bark at squirrels, at passing cars, at the ghost of a sound 3 blocks away that only their ears can catch. My shepherd mix was no different, or so I convinced myself during those initial weeks in the new house. It was always at the same hour. Between 3 and 4 in the morning, that liminal stretch of darkness when the world holds its breath, he would start. Not the excited yapping he reserved for the mailman, nor the territorial growl he aimed at stray cats. This was something else entirely, a frantic, desperate barking that seemed to tear itself from his throat against his will, punctuated by whimpers that made the hair on my arm stand at attention. The backyard wasn't large, a rectangle of dying grass bordered by a wooden fence that had seen better decades, with a single oak tree whose branches scraped against my bedroom window like arthritic fingers whenever the wind picked up. Nothing about it suggested menace in the daylight hours, but at night, standing at the back door in my boxers and a t-shirt, peering through the glass at my dog's silhouette trembling near the fence line, something felt fundamentally wrong. Every time I opened the door, he would bolt past me, not toward me, seeking comfort, but past me, into the house, scrambling on the hardwood floors in his haste to get away from whatever occupied that patch of darkness near the oak. He would wedge himself behind the couch or crawl beneath the bed, refusing to emerge until dawn painted the sky in shades of reluctant gray. My wife thought I was overthinking it. She would roll over when I slipped back into bed, mumbling something about raccoons or possums, animals our dog had never feared before. I wanted to believe her. God, how I wanted to believe her. But she never came downstairs with me. She never saw how he pressed himself against the ground, ears flat, tail tucked so tightly it seemed to disappear. She never noticed how his eyes stayed fixed on one specific spot near the fence, tracking something I couldn't perceive. After the first month, I started losing sleep, not just from the nightly interruptions, but from the anticipation of them. I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, counting the minutes until 3:17, because it was always 3:17 I'd checked, waiting for that first bark to shatter the silence. The waiting was almost worse than the sound itself. My body began to betray me. Dark circles carved themselves beneath my eyes. My hands developed a slight tremor that made my morning coffee ripple in its mug. My colleagues at work asked if everything was all right at home. I smiled and blamed a new mattress. I installed motion sensor lights in the backyard. They never triggered during his episodes. I set up a camera, one of those wildlife models that activates on movement, mounted on the fence post facing the oak tree. Every morning I would review the footage with the dedication of a detective examining crime scene evidence. Every morning I found nothing but static darkness and the distant shape of my dog, barking at empty air. But the footage bothered me in ways I couldn't articulate. The quality was poor, certainly. Cheap equipment produces cheap results. Yet there were moments, frames really, where the shadows near the oak seemed denser than they should have been. Thicker, almost textured. I would pause the video, squinting at the pixelated darkness, telling myself it was compression artifacts or lens distortion. The explanations tasted like ash in my mouth. The smell started sometime in the third month. A faint sweetness that didn't belong, like overripe fruit or flowers left too long in stagnant water. It clung to the backyard, strongest near the oak, impossible to locate or eliminate. I checked for dead animals, for rotting vegetation, for any rational source. I found nothing but healthy soil and ordinary grass, yet the smell persisted. My wife claimed she couldn't detect it. She looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between concern and a wariness that made my stomach clench. The oak tree began to look different. Not dramatically, nothing I could photograph and show someone as proof, but subtly wrong in ways that accumulated like sediment. The bark seemed darker on one side, almost black in certain lights. The branches appeared to reach toward the house with more intention than physics should allow. One morning, I noticed a patch of moss growing in a pattern that, if I let my eyes unfocus just slightly, resembled a handprint pressed flat against the trunk. I told myself it was pareidolia, the brain's tendency to find faces in clouds and figures in shadows. The explanation felt hollow. My dog stopped going outside voluntarily. He would hold his bladder to the point of visible discomfort rather than step onto the back porch. I had to carry him, all 60 pounds of trembling muscle, to the front yard for his business. He never looked toward the backyard during these trips. It was as if the entire rear portion of the property had ceased to exist in his perception, a blind spot he'd willed into being for his own protection. Sleep became a foreign concept. I drifted through days in a haze of exhaustion, my thoughts thick and slow like honey. Sometimes I would catch myself staring at the back door for minutes at a time, watching the way light filtered through the glass, searching for distortions I couldn't name. My wife started sleeping in the guest room. She said my restlessness was keeping her awake, but I saw how she avoided looking at me when she said it. I saw how she'd started keeping her phone within reach at all times, the screen angled away from my sight. It was a Tuesday when I finally decided to go outside, 3:18 in the morning. The barking had reached a fever pitch, a sound so raw and terrified that something inside me simply broke. I couldn't lie there anymore, paralyzed by fear of the unknown. Whatever tormented my dog deserved to be confronted, exposed, proven to be nothing more than a shadow or a trick of exhausted perception. I pulled on jeans and shoes, grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, and opened the back door before rational thought could stop me. The night swallowed me whole. There is a quality to darkness at that hour that defies description, a density, a weight that presses against the skin like cold hands. The air tasted metallic, wrong, carrying that sweet rotting scent so strongly it coated my tongue. My flashlight beam seemed weak, anemic, eaten by shadows that retreated just beyond its reach. The grass was wet with dew that soaked through my sneakers, each step producing a squelching sound that seemed obscenely loud in the stillness. My dog had stopped barking the moment I stepped outside. I could see him on the porch behind me, pressed against the door, watching. Not me. Something past me, beyond me, near the oak tree that stood like a wound against the sky. I walked toward it. My legs moved without consulting my brain, carrying me across the yard with the inevitability of a dream. The flashlight beam bounced with each step, casting dancing shadows that made the world stutter and jump. 10 feet from the tree, I stopped. The smell was overwhelming now, so thick I could taste it on every breath, sweet and rotten and somehow alive. The darkness beneath the oak's branches was absolute, a void that my flashlight couldn't penetrate, as if the light itself was being consumed. And within that darkness, something moved. Not wind, not an animal, something that displaced the air without disturbing it, that occupied space without reflecting light. I saw it the way you see floaters in your vision, not directly but in the periphery, sliding away every time I tried to focus. A shape that was almost human, almost upright, but wrong in its proportions. Too long in the limbs, too many joints where joints shouldn't be. It stood among the oak's roots like it had grown there, like it was part of the tree itself, ancient and patient and aware of me. I felt its attention like a physical pressure, a weight settling on my chest that made breathing difficult. My flashlight flickered, once, twice, and in those strobed moments of partial darkness, the shape seemed closer. It hadn't moved, couldn't have moved that fast, but the distance between us had halved without any visible motion. I could hear something now, beneath the thundering of my own heartbeat, a sound like breathing, but wet, labored, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I don't remember deciding to run. One moment I was frozen, flashlight trembling in my grip. The next I was slamming through the back door, locking it with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking. My dog pressed against me, whimpering, and I sank to the kitchen floor and held him until dawn. The days that followed exist in fragments, pieces of a puzzle I can no longer assemble correctly. I called in sick to work. I didn't tell my wife what I saw. How could I? She already looked at me like a stranger, like someone she was learning to fear. I boarded up the back windows with plywood, told her it was for insulation, watched her pack a bag 3 days later without a word. The sound of her car pulling out of the driveway felt like the final seal on a door I hadn't meant to close. Now I spend my nights in the living room, my dog pressed against my legs, watching the back door. The barking has stopped. Whatever ceremony or communication that sound represented, my participation seems to have satisfied it. But the scratching started instead, soft, rhythmic, like fingers trailing across wood. It comes from the oak tree's branches against the house, except the wind hasn't blown in weeks. The weather reports confirm it. I've checked obsessively, and still the scratching continues. Sometimes, in the space between sleeping and waking, I think I understand. The shape beneath the oak wasn't hiding from me. It was waiting, patient as only old things can be patient, counting the nights until curiosity overcame fear, until I stepped willingly into its territory and offered it something I cannot name. My dog knew. He tried to warn me every night for months, his barking not aggression but alarm, not confrontation but desperate plea. And I walked out anyway. The doctors say it's stress-induced psychosis. They have names for what afflicts me, clinical terms that sound like weapons, diagnoses that promise chemical solutions and therapeutic interventions. I take their pills and nod at their questions and let them believe I'm improving. But I still smell that sweetness when the wind shifts. I still see shapes in my peripheral vision that disappear when I turn. And every night, precisely at 3:17, my dog wakes and stares at the back door, whimpering softly, as if something is still out there, as if something is still waiting. Last night I found myself standing at the back door with my hand on the lock. I don't remember walking there, don't remember leaving the couch or crossing the room. I was simply there, fingers curled around cold metal, watching my reflection in the dark glass. Behind my reflection, beneath the oak tree, something watched back. I told myself it was a trick of light, a smudge on the window, a shadow from the streetlights, anything but what my eyes insisted it was. But when I lifted my hand to wave, to prove the reflection was mine alone, there was a delay. Half a heartbeat, maybe less, where my reflection's hand stayed at its side before slowly, wrongly, rising to match. I haven't looked in mirrors since. The thing about fear, the thing no one tells you, is how quickly it becomes ordinary. I wake up exhausted, I take my medications. I avoid the backyard and windows and reflective surfaces. These have become rituals as mundane as brushing my teeth. My dog follows me from room to room, never more than arm's reach away, and I take comfort in his presence even as I recognize what it means. He's not staying close for my protection. He's staying close for his own, because he knows what I'm only beginning to understand. That night in the backyard, I saw something that was never meant to be seen. And now it sees me. I don't know if this is madness. I don't know if those doctors are right. If my mind has finally fractured under the weight of sleepless nights and accumulated dread. But madness doesn't explain the scratching at the windows. It doesn't explain why my dog won't enter certain rooms anymore. Why he growls at corners where nothing stands. Why the sweet smell has started seeping under the back door despite the towels I've stuffed against the gap. Tonight, I sit in the living room with every light blazing, my dog pressed against my thigh, watching the minutes crawl toward 3:17. The scratching has already started, earlier than usual, more insistent. And beneath that sound, almost too low to hear, something that might be breathing, or might be waiting. I think, when the time comes, I'll open the door again. Not because I want to, but because I'm beginning to understand that I don't have a choice. I never had a choice. From the moment I first heard that desperate barking in the night, something set its attention on me. And attention, once given, cannot be taken back. My dog knows this. He knew it before I did. And somewhere beneath the oak tree, patient as stone, something is counting down the minutes until I step outside once more.